So please confirm, is that my screen is visible?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. So I guess we can start the session as we have less time. So we'll quickly get into the understanding of how do we create a web application today. So today we'll be seeing a lot of new learnings in terms of Spring MVC. I guess in the last class we discussed about the architecture of Spring MVC, and this is the diagram that I was trying to explain at the best of my possibility. Probably you would have gone through this meanwhile, and also you would have gone through the basics of servlets and how the servlet architecture works. And one more thing is, which I'm not sure if I've recalled that in the earlier session. To learn this, I mean, in order to involve with the UI part, the view implementation, you're supposed to have a knowledge on JSP. I guess I would have hinted about this a bit in the last Connect session. We call it as a JSP, a Java Server Pages, which will technically have your HTML templating code, right? And it's a Java side of scripting language. We call it as, but technically it is going to sit as a dot class only. The JSPs are going to be manipulated as a Java file at the end. But as a developer, we'll be looking at the JSP as a script. But apart from that, it's just a Java class at the end, which is going to be auto-generated. The codes are going to be auto-generated with the help of the JSP engine. We have something called JSP engine who does the job. Okay, so that's something which you should have today. Anyways, I'll be demonstrating straight away from the JSP codes. So see to that you're able to follow up. But that's just a view. One thing that I wanted to highlight here is the way how modern applications are developed today is going to be entirely different. Okay, forget about the legacy applications, but apart from that, just a second. What happened to my? I'm sorry. I didn't plug in my writing pad. Okay, so yeah, what I was trying to convey here is one thing. The one important thing that you have to note down here is the modern way of developing an enterprise application is not the way that we are going to see as a demo today. Okay, probably few applications or legacy applications, or even the few applications which you might be developing it very newly from a newer project, the client might expect the way of how I'm going to show the demo today. Okay, they might expect the application to be developed in that manner, but ultimately that's not how the modern applications are going to be developed henceforth. It's going to be slightly different. So we are going to bring in a term called microservices. Okay, so everything is going to be in terms of microservices. We are going to deal with microservices, and most of the applications are going to be deployed into the cloud-based production environment, right? So it could be an AWS, or it could be an Azure, or it could be a GCP, Google Cloud Platform. So anything you take for a cloud environment, we will have the option to provision those microservices application out there. But not necessarily all applications need to be microservices, but microservices is the way going forward. Okay. Can we choose microservices for a simple application? Ideally not. Okay. Microservices is for a pretty bigger application where minimum of 25 microservices which you should have. Okay, so then one day it seems to be a little bit of microservice, but today we don't do that. Even for three services, we go for opting for the choice of microservices because developing such applications seems to be pretty simple. So microservices, what I mean is, so going forward, the Spring applications are going to be used only for REST-based handling. Okay, you would have heard about the REST, right? Representational state transfer, we call it as. So that representational state transfer is the replacement for your general web services. Okay, initially we were having a web services. People who would have worked directly on web services might knew about how difficult it is to handle the web services implementation. So we call it as a SOAP protocol there, simple object access protocol, and then you'll be using a WSDL language, okay, web service definition language. So it's a big deal. But later on, they brought in a term called REST, and REST is simplifying the logic of how you exchange your data between the components or between the applications. So REST is just a plain standard of communications, either in the form of a JSON or it could be in the form of an XML. You can exchange the data in either format. So what Spring does is, what Spring is going to do in the going forward era of developing an application is, the Spring, we call it as a Spring REST, or we have something called uh, Spring Web Services. Okay, either way we can call it as. So these projects are going to help us in order to handle the REST-based applications. Okay, so what you exchange there is just a JSON or an XML. But who's going to be a front end? The front end is ideally a separate framework, a separate layer of application, which you will be Dockerizing separately. Today we talk about Dockers, right? So you Docker all your applications and then deploy it into the server. So Dockerizing the front end separate and Dockerizing the middleware separate. The front end applications are thoroughly going to be developed using Angular, as I said in the last class, or it's going to be in the React.js, right? So UI is completely going to be handled. The front end UI is going to be completely handled by these frameworks, not by Spring, not by Spring, not by Spring View. Okay, so this is the model and view which they are talking about here, right? So this is going to be ultimately replaced with this. So we are not going to use JSP anymore, okay, or we are not going to use Timeleaf, uh, right? So these are some of the scripting frameworks. So these are pretty old. It might become pretty old because these are the languages which we are not going to use in both in the middleware. Rather, we are going to replace them altogether with the help of Angular and React. So it's going to be completely isolated. The view part is not going to be bundled with middleware anymore. It's going to be isolated, wherein you will have your middleware only for handling the request and implementing the enterprise logic and hitting the database, communicating with the database, doing some other enterprise related functionalities rather than focusing too much of on the view. Okay, being said that, then you might ask a question, then why are we going to see the old story like handling the view part in the JSP? Can't you teach us directly by doing some Angular code or doing some Angular simple project and then hitting the application? Of course, we can do that, but that's not the way ideally we learn a particular framework. As I said, we have to start learning from the scratch. So that's why I'm going to spend some time in order to make you people to understand the view. Okay, how we are going to meddle with the view with the help of this Spring MVC architecture. We are going to closely understand that. But keep always in mind, going forward, like once after you complete this course, right? So your focus is going to be mainly on handling your REST calls, how you're going to handle the REST calls, how you're going to communicate when there is a REST implementation happens. So that's how you're supposed to look forward. But the other things are like something uh, a pretty old story, which we are going to follow it again. Okay, so I guess I've given a lot of information right now. So in this architecture, let's go step by step, okay, so that you will understand this. I'm not going to explain this again. Step by step, let's move forward. The first thing is there's something called web.xml, which we are not going to use anymore, the web.xml, but there's something called dispatcher servlet, right? The first thing that we have to do right now is how do we activate this dispatcher servlet, how we are going to activate them. This dispatcher servlet, as I said, it's a front controller, right? And you'll be having n number of back controllers. I gave a all briefing about that in the last session. So the front controller need to be activated. Okay, that's step number one. Now, before doing that step one, we need to create a new MVC application, right? We are going to create a new MVC application, and that new MVC application is a web-based application. It's a web-based application. So now we are going to create a new Maven project. We're going to create a new Maven project, and that project right now we are going to choose it as what archetype? It's a web archetype. So far you would have seen I was creating a Maven project by quick start type, right? It's just a standalone application. But this time I'm going to use a web archive and also ensure this web archive is going to be deployed inside EAP server. Okay, I have EAP 7.3, I guess. It's an enterprise application platform server, which is Jboss EAP. Okay, you can download them, or alternatively, you can just use Tomcat. You know Tomcat, right? You can just straight away use Tomcat. But if you meddle with Jboss, if some interviews, if they ask, do you know the knowledge on working around with Jboss? Have you done any deployments in Jboss? Probably you can say yes, and you can give some, you can throw some knowledge on that. Okay, because usually what happens is now we are not going to rely much on Jboss because it's Dockerizing, CI/CD comes in. The pipeline is entirely different. They go through Jenkins channel. We have a separate DevOps team. The developer is isolated from the work what is going to be done on the DevOps. But it's lucky if you're getting a chance to operate into the DevOps environment. Okay, if you're a developer and also you get a chance to work on the DevOps, ideally you have to embrace that channel of environment, because that gives you a lot of knowledge on how the actual CI and CD process happens, right? But at least basic knowledge of workaround with these servers are something essential. So either you go for opting for Tomcat, or you go for better to go for Jboss or even WebLogic, I would suggest. Okay, so let's go step by step. What is the first thing is we need to create a web Maven project, which I'll be doing it right away. So stay closer attention. Okay, any doubts, please do ask me then and there. I don't want to push this course much faster. I'm happy even if I'm going to take another one more week, which is going to happen next week. So I'm happy for that. And no hurry, burry, just the knowledge need to be imparted. That's all. So anyone who has a doubt, please raise it. Even if it's going to be a simple doubt, it's fine. If time permits, I'll be able to try to explain within that stipulated time period. Else not, I will even throw the response through the group that we have, group channel that we have. But don't hesitate from asking questions. Okay, don't think that will this be a valid question or not. Doesn't matter. Okay, even if it's not going to be a valid question, that's fine. Okay, it doesn't make any difference whether it's a valid or invalid. Question is a question, right? So I'm going to give a response at the best of my possibilities. So please don't hesitate and don't have the thought process that whether he will be able to whether he will answer for such kind of a questions or not. Because a couple of response I got from the team saying that whether I'm okay with accepting the questions, too many questions. Of course, yes, I'm very much happy to answer to the questions, because through questions I learn a lot. That's what I wanted to summarize. When you ask more questions, if I'm unable to answer for that question, then literally I try to get answer for that question in different means. So it gives a channel for me to grow as well. So questioners are very much encouraged from my side. Never ever have that thought. Don't block yourself from asking questions. Okay. So what is that we need to do is just go ahead and create a Maven project. Where it is here. Bring my mic a little closer. If you have any challenge in my voice, please do let me know. Okay. So as I said, we are going to create a Maven project, and this time it's not of this quick start type. I'm not going to use that. Okay. Instead of using this is a standalone, a simple application, a Java application using Maven support, right? But right now I'm going to create a Java web application. So to create a Java web application, we are supposed to go for this Maven Archetype web app. See to that you have this option in your system. probably in your ID. You can just check for it. Still, I'm working around with the lower version, but even though we have a higher version available for the archetype, if you have that, it's better. And it's better you can use them. But right now, I'm going for this Maven Archetype web app. Please make a note of it. Maven Archetype web app. This is the group ID. If you wanted to search through group IDs, you can just make a note of it. It's org.apache.maven.archetypes, and the artifact ID is maven-archetype-web app, and you have the version representation here. What this is going to do is this is going to help us in creating a structure, a Java project structure. The Maven is going to automate the creation of a Java project structure. What kind of a Java project are we going to create? Web project, Java web project. We call it as a facet. I'm not sure if you're aware of this term. So the facet is going to be a dynamic web project. Please make a note of it. It is dynamic web project. Web project, generally what it refers to is static. If you have a HTML, collection of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it's called as a web project. But dynamic web project is something which we call it in the middleware. Okay, and the last class I was differentiating the client side, right? A single tier, 2-tier, 3-tier, right? So in the 3-tier, you have a front end, you have your middleware, and then you have your backend. So dynamic web project is what we can create with the help of this Maven web archetype. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, having said that, now we are going to define the artifact ID. So let's go ahead and say com. This time I'm going to use SkillUp. It's more similar like an American Express. So there we had a bank called American Express. Here right now I'm going to have SkillUp as the name. Okay. So it's again more relevant to banking kind of an application. Just to simulate that. That's it. So com.skillup. And then artifact ID is going to be the project name. What I would like to find here is SkillUp Bank. Okay. And in the package, you can just have SkillUp. It's all the same like what we usually do in the earlier archetype, Maven archetype that we used, right? A quick start. That's solely a standalone application, but now it's a web application. I guess that's it. These are the feeding in of informations. You just hit finish. And you can see the Maven project gets created. This is a quite different structure, okay, compared to the structure that we have in the other applications. So if you look at the American Express and you look at the web application, so the difference that you mainly notice here is the additional structures like web app will be there. Okay, if you look at here source, you don't have such additional directories, but here you will have the web-inf. That's very important, web information directory. Okay, you have a default index.jsp, which here you don't have that, right? So what are the changes that we have to do? Once after we create this application, what are the changes are we going to do? The first change.
Activate the sequence external.
Compiler change.
Yeah. You have to mute. Expand this. Yeah. So yeah, that's correct. The first thing is we need to upgrade the JRE version, which is from 1.5 to the one that we have in our system. So let's go and do that right away. So let's go to properties. Here, the first thing is Java build path. And there, click on the Java library version and edit and go for the built-in 14. And looking at the compiler, again, we have to change it to the upgraded version of 14. Okay. So once we have done, you can notice small change would have happened. It created some resources and test directories. That's all fine. The next important thing that we have to do here is so compiler build path. The next thing is this project can be bounded with some server. Okay. So we have something called project facets here. This is what I was talking about, the project facet. We have targeted runtime. We have what else? Server representation. Then we have uh, web content settings. These are all additional things which you will find only in the web application. Web project settings, web content settings, these are all something new. Okay. So what we have to do right now is the next immediate step is just go to this project facets and have a quick look. What you have to learn in the project facet, first one, the project facet will make this particular project enable for that particular type of application. Facets is you can create this kind of a combination, and you can also create a custom combination of facets, and whenever needed you can just plug in that facet. Now what this web facet will have is, as I said, it's a dynamic web module. Okay, otherwise it's just going to be called as a standalone application, right? So it's a dynamic web module, and then you have your Java version. So this need to be changed since it's referring to 1.5, and then the runtime. So what is the runtime is? Runtime is the runtime environment where this project is going to be executed. That's none other than your server. So we have to look out for any availability of the server here. Okay. The one change that we do here on the project facet is look at this, whether the dynamic web module is enabled. Another one is Java. Looking at the Java, you have to upgrade it to 14. Okay, and apply. So by this way, we are able to upgrade this project facets. But right now you are not able to see any runtimes as such. Okay, that's fine. If it's minimum version, then sure, the runtime will be reflected. That's okay. Right now I'm just choosing if it's, let's say, okay, let it be 14. Looking at the targeted runtime. So right now it's not reflecting any targeted runtime. You can see the Jboss EAP 7 is reflected in the server, but targeted runtime is not reflecting. So if I say show as well, still it is not enabled. So let's go back to the project facet. Let me see if the lower version would suffice. Yes. So now you can see when the project facet is set to the minimum of 1.8, the runtime is reflected here. Okay, so means this particular EAP 7.3 runtime is activated for 1.8, not for 14. Okay, so please make sure that based on the runtime environment, you can set your version. Okay, so anyways, minimum is 1.8 is what we needed for our project. So going to the target runtime, now you can see it is activated. So we can select that in the target runtimes and you can apply. So what happens is this particular server, the Jboss EAP server 7.3 is bounded with this particular project. That is a meaning. So in target runtime, if you have a Tomcat, then Tomcat will be visible here. Okay. So right now I have WebLogic, so that WebLogic server is reflected. If it's a Tomcat, Tomcat will be reflected. In the project facet, you will see that this particular server is enabled. Okay. So what happens if the build path is changed to 1.8? Let it be, doesn't matter. But I have 14. That's okay. Let's go with 1.8 temporarily, because based on the runtime server only, we have to choose the Java version. Okay, so that's how it is. Now it's automatically set back to 1.8 as per the project facets that we have chosen. Okay, so when it comes to web application, the most important thing that you have to note down is your project facet. Project facet should be a dynamic web module, and you can see it's reflecting to 2.3. If needed, you can upgrade them as well to 3 or whatever it is. You have 1.8. Okay.
Sir, this Jboss server is inbuilt server or we need to install separately?
Of course, we have to install separately. You won't get the Jboss. Jboss is Red Hat's product, right? So okay, you have to get them downloaded. I guess I would have shared the link earlier. So right now you can see my dynamic web module is set to 3.0. The reason I'm setting it to 3.0 is because I want the version to be more relevant to annotation enabled. Even if it's a servlet, I want the servlet to be annotation enabled. So that's the reason I'm just looking out for 3.0. You can have more upper version as well for 3.1 and 4.0 is also there. That's okay if you start with 3.0. That's the minimum requirement if you want to work around with annotations for servlets. So these are the settings. Yes, of course, you won't have this EAP. You have to go and download from the Red Hat Jboss EAP 7.3. Change rebuild. Yes. So now you have to notice by default, this project has web.xml. You all know what web.xml is meant for, right? In web applications, servlets can be configured, filters can be configured. You know what filters are, you know what servlets are, right? So you can configure the context parameters, right? Context parameters, that is application context parameters if you want it. So a lot of things you can do it. You can do a filter mapping. You can do servlet URL mapping, right? All these are configurations that we generally do when we are working on top of a servlet application. So for that, we use web.xml. But today, we are not going to use this web.xml because the servlets are ready-made servlet, which we call it as a dispatcher servlet. And this dispatcher servlet is going to be activated without the need of any XML configuration. So we're going to use Java-based configuration. Java-based configuration, and that's the advantage of using a Spring Web MVC, correct? So this is offered by whom? This is offered by Spring MVC project, right? So in that case, we can Spring is supporting Java-based configuration, so we can activate dispatcher servlet with the help of Java-based configuration. So we are not going to use this web.xml anymore. Okay. Now, the next important thing, if you're pretty new to this environment, the one thing that you have to note down here is in the Spring Tool suite, you have window, show view, and you'll be finding servers. I repeat again, window, show view menu, submenu, and inside that show view submenu, you have servers. Okay, so when you click that servers, you get the server tab here, and in your case, it will be empty. Okay, so somewhere in the white space in the tab on the tab servers tab, you can right click and you will see new option to add a new server into your IDE. And while you're choosing this, it will prompt for the type of servers that you want to add. So you can go for Apache, expand that by drilling down. You will see all the versions of Tomcat listed. So you can go if you want to use version 9.0, you can just go and download the Tomcat version 9.0, which is free of cost. It's a freeware, and you load it in some location. You choose this Tomcat, hit next, locate the root directory of your Tomcat, okay, and hit OK, and the JRE have to be chosen, and that's it. Your task is done. But in my case, what I have done is I'm using Jboss community, and here you'll be having Jboss. Okay, so check pivotal. Yeah, Jboss Red Hat Jboss middleware. I'm sorry. In the middleware server, you'll be having Jboss EAP. Okay, Jboss Enterprise Application Platform, and I'm right now using 7.3. Okay, 7.3 is which I'm using. So you can select that type, but you might not have this Red Hat Jboss middleware in your IDE. Please make a note of it. You might not have the Red Hat Jboss middleware option in your IDE. You might not. In that case, you have to go to the marketplace. Eclipse Marketplace. In the help menu, you have in Mac, I'm viewing it on the help. So here you need to search for Jboss EAP plugin. Okay, you got to install them manually. After which that option will be displayed there, and you can download the Jboss EAP server 7.3 from the portal, and then keep it in one location, and then map it same as like Tomcat. Okay, so it'll take some time to load all the dependencies. I'm sorry, the plugins. So when I search for Jboss, I guess since I've already installed, should be installed place. Yeah, it is Jboss Tools. It is reflecting. Just a second. Red Hat. So this is the one which I'm talking about right now. Okay, the tools that you are supposed to use in order to make sure this Jboss EAP option is available. Okay, you can search for it, and then probably if possible, I'll just get you the link as well. And right-click, new server, go for the choice of the version that you have downloaded, and then hit next. You can leave this as such. You need not make any change. It's a local server. Okay, it's not a remote server. You're working around in the local machine, and it will prompt for the same setup. Since I've already added in my machine, it's not prompting. But technically, what happens is it will prompt for the location where the Jboss is, and you need to refer the root directory of that Jboss server software, and automatically it will pick up and it will ask for the JRE. You can map the JRE, and you're done. You're good to go. So that's how this happens. Let me delete this instance. So either you go for Tomcat or you go for EAP. Okay. Now coming to our application, I've bounded this project to this respective server, right? So just now I showed you have the server runtime environment, and there target runtimes. Please make a choice of the runtime environment. Okay. And before that, as I said, you need to do some settings on the project facets. You can choose based on the runtimes. You can choose your Java version and also ensure the dynamic web module is enabled. Okay. Fine. But if you look at it here, this is the location where we will be dropping all the JSP files. We'll come to this a bit later. I'm going to deploy this application into this Jboss server. Okay. So you can right click and run as. So far we were running it as Java application. Now we are going to run it on server. Hit next. So you might have multiple servers. You can choose the server that you want to deploy this application to and hit next. I have other applications as well, which I don't want to deploy them. So I want to deploy only the skill app bank. So since I right click from that project, this project is picked up for configuring into the server. You can hit finish, and you should notice that the application is getting deployed. And on the console, you will get all the logging informations of how the server is getting started and how successfully the application is getting deployed. The complete logging informations will be captured on the console screen. So we'll wait until the application server gets started and see if this application goes into that server. I didn't do any code change. I didn't add any code as well, but a default web application, an empty web application, which is getting deployed into the server, keeping in mind that in the source we had a default file called index.html. I believe you would have noticed that, right? So we had that index.html file. So we are looking for that file to be launched. So in the server, you should see the status of the flag where it says it's still starting and the application is still synchronizing. And now it's successfully started. See the status of the application. These are the troubleshooting places. Okay. Sometimes you might not get this output. So quickly you have to go and see the first step is whether the server is started. The second step is whether the application is successfully started. Okay. So this you need to check. So how this application is deployed into it, as what archive is this deployed? Any idea? Right now I'm deploying this application here. So what archive it is deployed to? In the last class I was briefing about.
Web archive.
Yes, it's deployed as a var. Okay, the .var file, it's a web archive file. So far, whatever American Express or whatever the inventory service that we have created is all a
jar.
Java archive, right? Only the web archive source can go into the application service. You can't directly deploy the jar into it. Okay, it won't accept. So either, since it's an enterprise application, either it should be a var, or you can compress var EAR, var jar, everything into an upper level archive called EAR, which is an enterprise archive file. So jar, var, and EAR, all the three are the three standards of archives that we have. Okay. So do you have any questions on this? Till this, if you have any questions, please do let me know. This is the URL now. How the hello world comes by default. You can see the default inbuilt ID browser is picked up and it's printing hello world. That's because we have this default file index.jsp. Okay, this is the file that's automatically picked up. Okay, this is a JSP file, a static file, a representation which is picked up and responded. So that's how it is. Okay, so the same thing which I can throw it into the Chrome browser as well. So you can replace the same link and hit. So now what happens? Same output. So you can access from your browser as well. Correct? Now the question is what this URL refers to. We'll break them down into multiple pieces. First, the local host is a representation of your domain name. But since it's all running in the local machine, your client, your server, everything is in your local machine, right? So it's 127.0.0.1 is the representation of IP for localhost, correct? We all knew this. So localhost is the first part, colon. So the localhost means it talks about the current machine, the local machine. In this machine, you might be having multiple servers. Server 1, server 2, server 3. So multiple different servers might be running. Okay, it could be an application server, could be a mail server. Okay. Could be a messaging server, right? So you might be having multiple servers running in your machine, IIS server. So which server will you prompt for? Okay, so that identified with the help of a port number. So you know what port numbers are meant for, right? So port number is uniquely identifying the server in the same machine. So we have a street, and in the street we have multiple houses. All houses are belonging to this Redmond Street. So even though it belongs to the Redmond Street, each house need to be identified uniquely. And so you have your house number. And that house number is what the representation of the port number. Okay, each server will be dedicated with a unique port number. And if you have the same house number, then it becomes a conflict. The same way when you have a same port number, it becomes a conflict, a port conflict we call it as, right? So right now, a default port that's been set for this EAP server, Jboss EAP server is 8080. It's running with 8080. If you want to change them, you can of course go ahead and change it, but I'm not doing it right now. Let it be as 8080. The next important piece. So first one is the local host port number. The third part, what you're seeing in your web application is the context root. Okay, it is called as a context root to represent your application, because inside this EAP server, you might be deploying multiple var files. Do you agree? Not necessary that server should contain only one application, right? You can deploy as many number of web applications that you want it. So to which web application the request should go? To which var should you request it? how you will identify them, that's where the context root comes into the picture. Okay, the context root is same as your what name? The project name. The context root is same as the project name, right? So if you still want to visualize them, you can just go to the project of this application. I'm sorry, the properties of this application. And there you'll find web project setting. Okay, in the web project setting, you have the choice to change your context root. Can you see that? So by this way, you can identify that this is your context root. So this context root is defaulted to your project name. So the context root and your project name should be same. As of now, it is same. Okay. So here where you can refer that web project settings are there, right? So that's what it is. And from there, once after you reach that particular project, any other further informations on the URL, this is your URL, right? In this URL, anything post this context root will all be handled by, should all be handled by a controller. Till this, the server takes care. And identifying a default file of index.jsp is also taken care. That's a static page. But I have to configure in such a way any request that comes in from here on after this slash anything that you give, okay, should all be handled only by the person called the controller. And he is the one who's standing in front, so that I will call it as a front controller. Since we are going behind the Spring MVC, we have a dispatcher servlet pre-cooked, so you can enable the dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet is going to be acted as your friend controller. Is that clear? Now the next step is we need to activate this. We need to activate this dispatcher servlet. So henceforth, any request that you give, you will have a respective servlet who will handle that incoming request and help you out in getting the right response that you wanted or that you desire for. So let's say I want to ask for, let's say, add account. Just like that, if I say add account, you will get a response saying that not found. Such resource are not found. That is the meaning. Okay, we don't have any such resource like add account. So it is all a resource searching. This particular resource which you are looking out for is not available. To make it available, you need to code it and ensure that's been correctly mapped. The resource is currently mapped with the help of the friend controller, which is nothing but your DS. So I'm going to call it shortly henceforth as DS. DS means dispatcher servlet. Is that clear? If you have any questions till this, these are very basic fundamentals. If most people who are already working on it might be aware of it, others who are new, just make a note of it. So context root is a term that you should remember. If you are sitting on top of a Spring Boot application, okay, if you have developed any Spring Boot application, you will never see a context root there. But if you wanted, you can configure them separately. Since it's an embedded server that comes into the Spring Boot and it is self-executable jar, you don't go for a context root appearance there. Okay, but traditionally, when web applications are created, we are enforced to have a context root. So any questions till this point, please let me know. Let me take some questions first before we move forward. Things are clear? So how do we create a web project, web application project, a dynamic web application project? And we understood some of the structures of it. And we launched the application into the external server. This is an external server. You have an embedded server and you have an external server. Embedded server is something which is embedded within your project. Okay, so project will maintain the server. And that's what we call it as embedded server. And that's what Spring Boot does. Project takes care of, take control of server. But now the server is taking control of your project. That's the difference between a Spring Boot embedded server, and then traditional external server. Okay. So you have to abide by the rules of what the external server says. Okay, your project should adhere the rules. Then only it will accept you to deploy it successfully. So the server takes care of your project, whereas here the project will control your server, and that's called as an embedded server. Can we go for an embedded server here? No, you cannot. Okay, this is developed in such a way to deploy it in an external mode. If you want like embedded server implementations, then you better go for, we have to better go for Spring Boot. People who have learned Spring MVC, okay, people who have learned Spring MVC, Spring Core, and Spring JDBC, those people will find nowhere difficulty when they go for Spring Boot. Okay, Spring Boot is just like that, you can learn it. Okay, but initially the first time learning seems to be a little trivial, how it is all happening, a lot of auto configuration happens, and how this and that happens. Probably for that you can gain some knowledge out of researching and stuff like that, but ideally working on top of a Spring Boot is pretty easy. But if you want to go more deeper into it and have more knowledge, more essence of knowledge, then you can think of having some additional references to gain more knowledge on top of it. Because people nowadays, what happens is, so today also I handled some 4 to 5 interviews, okay, today for one of the project, and the people are 3.5 years experience, 3 years experience, 4.5 years experience. All these people have given a very rich informations on their resume. Okay, all are top-notch technologies, this and that. But I'm just trying to understand what is their basic knowledge on the Spring Boot, but they are unable to answer for it. Okay, the reason is they have been forced directly to work on Spring Boot. People are forced to directly work on Spring Boot without getting the knowledge on Spring. That's fine. That's how it is. That's how the projects are, and that's how the requirements are, and that's how the pace is going on. So we cannot do anything. But at least those guys who should have learned by themselves on the Spring fundamentals, because they are unable to differentiate and also unable to say how this Spring Boot works when compared to the traditional Spring application. So those are something that which we cannot compromise on, is what I want to conclude. Okay, so this is done. No questions? All set to go? Okay. Now, let's go step by step. So we have index.jsp here. You can just have a quick look at it. This is just a plain HTML. We don't have much of code here. Okay, if you wanted to create another JSP file, you just go ahead and create it. But right now we don't have anything. It's just a simple file. So I can say hello SkillUp, welcome to SkillUp Bank. SkillUp Bank. Okay, so this is a JSP static file, so there's no need of redeployment. So you can see as and when you change on the static resource, your response is there accordingly. Okay, so you don't need to restart or you don't need to redeploy. So when there is a redeployment happens is whenever you make a change on the dynamic resources. That's your Java files or property files. So such resources are dynamic resources. Then where you need to redeploy your project again into the server to bring the effect of the change. Okay, to see the effect of the change, you have to redeploy them into the application server again, and that is a change happens in dynamic resources. So what is the next step is we need to go ahead and do a activation of a dispatcher servlet. So how are we going to do that? The very first thing is, I guess we have given the project, I'm sorry, the package name, but still it didn't pick up. That's fine. We'll go ahead and create the package first. com.skillup is the package name. And in this package, I'm going to have, this is a place where I'm going to have a configuration classes straight away into this package com.skillup. I'm going to have the configuration classes. The very first configuration class that I'm going to do right now is the the servlet, web servlet configuration. We call it as web servlet. Anything would suffice. Okay, but I'm giving a name called web servlet configuration. Any name that you wanted, you just go ahead and give them. Not an issue at all. But right now, I'm just choosing the name as web servlet. So what we do in the web servlet configuration, what I'm going to do, this is a class. Just a second, if anyone. Okay, for a while you can mute. Yes. So yeah. So what happens here is this is a class where we are going to activate the dispatcher servlet. DS. Can we give dispatcher servlet configuration? Of course you can give it. Can I give summary configuration? Of course you can do it. Any name would suffice. That's not at all an issue here. Okay. But what this class is going to carry, it's going to carry some 5 to 6 lines of code. Just 5 to 6 lines of code to activate the dispatcher servlet. To activate the dispatcher servlet, we need to rely on this 5 to 6 lines of code. Okay. But when you go to the Spring Boot, you never do this. You need not sit and activate this dispatcher servlet. It's automatically activated. Okay, so that's the difference. So automation is the major job that happens in the Spring Boot. Oh my God, I've closed it. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this again, class, and define it as web servlet configuration. Okay, web servlet configuration, and hit finish. Okay, so we have this web servlet configuration in place. What we have to do as step, no annotations are required as such. No annotations are required on class level. Okay. Step 1. You have to go for web application initializer. You can see there is something called web application initializer. Okay. Another most important thing that we have missed out is the dependencies. Go to the pym.xml as like we did for the Spring Core, right? So here we need to add the dependencies. We don't have any of the Spring related dependencies. So go and add Spring-web. Spring Web MVC. So a lot of things are there, right? So I'm just choosing Spring Web. Let's go to the dependencies. Okay. Should be there inbuilt. Okay, now we have. So just go ahead and hit the Spring Web MVC. The reason I've removed the Spring Web is because Spring Web MVC has this internal dependency. Okay, that is called as a transitive dependencies, as I've already stated. So Spring Web MVC carries AOP, beans, context, core, expression, and the web. That's why I opted for Spring Web MVC. Otherwise, what will happen? I just include the Spring Web and then I need to go for adding the context. By adding the context, I will get all other dependencies. But instead of that, we have uh, the combined dependencies and kept it under the name called Spring Web MVC. So right now the version that's reflecting here is 5.3.7. That's the latest version that I have in my mission. Okay, so this is the dependency that you have to add in your system. Spring-Web MVC, which you can search for. So what if in case you don't have that Spring-Web MVC in your mission? You better go and get the POM XML for syntax for the very first time, and then you punch it into the pom.xml file and save it, and it'll auto download. And from there, next time onwards, when you create the project, automatically the local repository will pick that particular Spring-Web MVC related libraries or the dependencies. So right now I'll just share it on the chat and see if you are able to access them. Hope it's accessible. Okay. Now, coming back to this, yeah. Once after we have added the dependency, you can see that there is an interface called Web Application Initializer. Okay, Web Application Initializer. It's an interface. This interface is what we need to implement in this activation class. So this class is meant for activating the dispatcher servlet. Okay, this is exclusively for activating the dispatcher servlet. So web servlet configuration implements, okay, web application initializer, right? So once this implementation happens, it's an interface, and if you just go dwell into this interface, you can see it's an interface which carries a on startup method. Okay, it carries one on startup method. That is a method that you have to override here. Right? So once after we have overridden the on startup method where it carries a servlet context, and you have the servlet context in here. So on startup servlet context. So here the on startup method of web application initializer interface carries a parameter called servlet context. The servlet context is nothing but your application context. Don't get confused with the application context which we use in Spring Core. I was briefing about application context, right? That's different. This is servlet containers application context is what we technically call it as servlet context. Now in the web application, it's going to be two things. So you have your server, that is your Jboss EAP server, and inside the server you have deployed your WAR, the application, right? You will have a container called web container. Every enterprise server will have a web container, and inside the web container is where you will configure this dispatcher servlet. Okay, and along with the web container, you will also have your IOC container. You should have, because you have the Spring environment coming into the picture, right? So you need to have the IOC container. But the main important thing is we need to bridge them. The web container and the IOC container have to be bridged. Then only there will be a smooth communication will happen between the servlet and the IOC container references. Okay, so we need to bridge them. You need to bridge the web container and the IOC container together. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Those are the things that we are going to see in this code step by step. We'll see that right away. So always you should have the application context from the web application scenario. So servlet context is always there. So the very first thing is we need to create step two is to create the IOC context. We already have the web container context here, servlet context, right? But now we need to create the IOC context, which is nothing but application context. But here, what is the application context that we used earlier in the standalone application? Annotation config application context, correct? This is the type of application context that we created there. But right now, we are not going to use that. Instead, it's a web scenario, right? It's a web application. So we need to go for annotation config web application context. The name of the context is annotation config web application context equals context equals new annotation config web application context. Now earlier, when I want to declare this with web.xml, okay, if I wanted to use the Spring Web with XML based configuration, then I'll be using spring-web.xml, and that will be treated as your IOC containers Spring definition configuration file. Okay, XML file is there, Java file is there, right? What base configuration are we going for? Java based configuration. So I'm not going to create any spring-web.xml. I don't want to complicate things, right? So we are not going to sit on top of the XML anymore, but we are going to do a Java based configuration. So that's why I went for annotation config web application context. But if still an legacy application you still have and you want to meddle with spring-web.xml, this is not web.xml. Okay, one more thing that I can give you is web.xml is noted down by web container. I was talking about the web container here, right? Every Java web application have to be placed inside the web container. Web container will get the definitions from web.xml. Spring-web.xml or any other name you can give, doesn't matter. That will be referred by IOC container. And what is this IOC container is? It's a special IOC container, which is called as a web IOC container. We'll call it like this, web IOC container. It's not an ordinary container, ordinary IOC container. Ordinary IOC container is what we were using in American Express project, and we were using an inventory service. All these are standalone applications, so we were using the default IOC container. But now there's a specially trained IOC container is there, and we are going to call it as a web IOC container. How to activate that web IOC container? That's why we use this middle term. Can you see that? There's a special class being used. Rest is all the same, right? Annotation config application context. Annotation config application context is all same, but the middle term web refers that it is a specially designed IOC container exclusively for supporting the web environment. Okay, so if in case you want to use the XML, then you want to configure with the XML base, then still you have the choice, and there you will be having class path XML web application context. Okay. XML. Yeah, it is XML web application context. Okay. XML web application context, not as in class path, because we don't have a class path here. It's all referenced in the container level, right? We are deploying it into the server. Before it was a server level. So it's XML web application context is there instead of annotation config. Here again, you can see the term called web. You can see there's a term called web, right? So it's enabling whom? Activating whom? The IOC container. But this is not an ordinary IOC container. It's a web IOC container. So when it comes to the web application, you just call it as web IOC container. That's it. That's the difference. So we need to activate them appropriately. So you'll use the same context equals XML web application. Why I'm giving these piece of information is you should be ready enough to answer these questions also if in case you're facing any interviews. Okay, they might ask you, do you have a knowledge on how do you use XML configurations in your web application in Spring? You can still answer them by just using this class name. Yes, of course we can do it. We need to activate the web IOC container. And for that, if it's XML based, it's XML web application context. If it's a Java based configuration, you can use annotation config web application context. So step number 1, what we did was implementing the web application initializer interface. Web application initializer interface. Okay, for the class that we have created. Second is override the onStartup method of this interface from the interface. And step 2 is you create the web application context. Step 3, we need to register the Java configuration file, correct? That's what we technically do, and that's what we did in the earlier learnings as well. We need to register the Java configuration file. For that, first we need to create that file, right? So let's go ahead, right click, new, create a class. I'm going to call it a skill-up configuration. Skill-up configuration. And this Java class will be called as what? The first annotation that we are supposed to use is what here? At configuration, right? The next thing that you can do is if you're going to use auto wiring with more of annotation based configuration, then you can use at component scan, correct? And you can use the base package. The base packages are going to be, the first one that we are going to use is the default root package, that is com.skillup. This is traditionally we do it, right? One additional thing that we have to do when it comes to the web application is at enable web MVC. Okay, at enable web MVC. I'll give you more briefing about what this at enable web MVC does later, but right now just think of these are the 3 annotations that we have to inject it before the class of this Java based configuration file. So here what we do, we create all the admin, right? And you define the configurations, Java based configurations for it if needed. Since we are not going to do this because most of the things are going to be component scanned and you'll be creating with the annotation itself over there. Okay, so that is how it works. Okay, so the next thing that we have to do here is going back to the configuration, we need to register them. So context dot register the class. So what is the class name? SkillUp configuration dot class. Okay, so registration is done. What is the next level is step 4. We need to activate the dispatcher servlet and bind the DS with the servlet context, that is the application context. Okay, so that is which we have to do as the next step. I'll just show you that. So actually technically calling, we are going to register the servlet. We are doing the servlet to be registered. The dispatcher servlet is going to be registered and the dispatcher servlet is going to be binded with application context. Sorry. Application context here. We created the context here, right? The IOC container, the web IOC container have to be binded with this dispatcher servlet environment. So that is what we are going to do. So servlet registration, we have a specific class called servlet registration, and in that you have a inner interface. Okay, like how we have an inner class, the same way we have an inner interface. So the interface name is dynamic, and for that you're going to create an instance. So let's say Servlet Registration. Okay. Now the next important thing is we already have the Servlet context, correct? So using the Servlet context, you're going to register the servlet dynamically. For that you have add servlet method. Add servlet method. This add servlet method takes a couple of parameters. The first one is the name of the servlet. So the name of the servlet that I'm going to use is dispatcher. Okay, and the servlet by itself. How you will create the servlet instance? New dispatcher servlet. Okay, and this servlet, as I said, this servlet need to be bounded with the context, right? IOC, web IOC context need to be bounded with the servlet that we create. So the argument that you're going to pass here is none other than the object of your context. I mean here the web IOC container context. Please make a note of it. Okay, so let's say web context, web IOC context. Let it be more meaningful so that you can remember what we are doing here. So what I'm doing is I'm binding the web IOC context into the dispatcher servlet, and the dispatcher servlet is activated by a name for it. And that's been done with the help of the servlet context. Servlet context is coming from here, the object. The servlet context dot, I'm adding the servlet, and this operation will return an instance which is dynamically registering that servlet. This is the step number 4, a one-line operation, but there are multiple things to be learned out of it. All these things we can do it in XML also. You can go to the web.xml and you can do everything here as well. You can activate the dispatcher servlet. How you will do it in the web app? The first thing is what? You have to use servlet name, right? Servlet name, servlet. So inside that you'll be having servlet name, and then you have to give a name. What is the name that I'm going to give? Dispatcher, and then you have to use servlet class, right? So all these are the steps that we technically do here. So which we don't need to do any of that configuration here anymore, right? So what happens here is instead of having all these set of XML based configurations, okay, you can just go ahead and define it in the Java based configuration. But the one more thing that you have to notice here is the next step, step number 5, is URL pattern. Okay, so servlet registration dot, before URL pattern, I want to load this servlet. So you have a method called set load on startup. You have a load on startup tag as well, right? Inside this XML. You have this load on startup. So when I say 1, this will be the first servlet that will get loaded initially. When the application is deployed, immediately the first servlet to be loaded, not after the deployment. During the deployment time itself, the server will try to initiate the container, web container, and load the servlet into the web container. So we use the load on startup. Similar thing that we have to do it here. So I'm going to give load on startup as 1. That is starting the servlet and registering them into the web container at the time of deploying the application into the server. I mean server means the EAP server. Okay, that's step number 5. Step number 6, the final step. Step number 6 is set the URL pattern. You know what I mean by URL pattern here, right? So in the URL, as I said, anything that you give here, let's say subarray, henceforth any request that I start providing after this context path, who should access that request? the dispatcher servlet that we configured should handle that request. Okay, so we need to say servlet registration dot set add mapping. Yeah. So URL mapping, it is called as URL pattern mapping. So it is called as add mapping. And here I'm going to give slash. What the slash refers is, so it actually means slash star. So what the slash star means, after this context root slash, any request you send in with the URL name, that will be handled by this servlet. That is what this URL pattern means. This we do it in the web.xml as what? Servlet mapping, servlet name, URL pattern, and here you will be giving slash. And the name of the servlet which we have already configured is here. So that's why if you have worked on this, then you can quickly understand what I'm doing in the Java configuration. Are you getting this? This is how we do in the web.xml configuration. I'm not using web.xml at all. In place of a web.xml and replacing it with the Java-based configuration exclusively for activating the servlet, dispatcher servlet, not my own servlet. I didn't create any servlet. But if you're creating a non-Spring web application, then you have to create a servlet. Imagine you have to create a servlet. Here we are not creating the servlet. Servlet is already created and kept it in the library of the Spring MVC. We are just activating it. For activating, we have to do all these steps. These steps which you need not do if you go for a Spring Boot application. Today, I'll right away show you how a Spring Boot application is created and how quickly we can do this. Okay, it's just a matter of time you can complete it. I'll try to show that demo as well today. But please let me know if you have any questions. Very important. Dynamic registration happens. Dynamic servlet registration. So these are something, a syntactical flow which you have to remember. Possible you remember, or just at least remember the terms like dynamically registering the server. I'm sorry, the servlet. And you need to add the servlet for that. As many number of instances of the dispatcher servlet you want to add, you can add them. Along with the dispatcher servlet, what you have to bind it is your IOC container. The IOC container is web IOC context, which we have created just now, and that's been binded. So all these are being done right away in this one single line. Is that clear? If you have any questions on this, please do let me know. Any question? So right now what we are doing is just registering the servlet. That's all. Any question? Any area that you wanted to reiterate? Please do let me know. So many things, right, to learn, but that's how it is. So this is how. So even before you step into the Spring Web MVC, you should be very active on the servlet area. That's a prerequisite, actually. Probably most of you would have worked on servlet, either in your college days or somewhere in your learning curve or in your project experiences. So believing that you have that knowledge. So if you wanted to learn Spring, two things should be in place. One, you should be very skilled on core Java. Second, you should be highly skilled on servlets, minimum servlets. We used to say servlets in JSP, which is a part of a Java EE, Java Enterprise Edition. Core Java is a part of a Java SC, Java Standard Edition, right? You should be a part of this. So these two are very essential. But JSP is optional. since we are not going to sit on top of the JSP anymore, the modern application development, it's all going to be taken care by the frameworks like Angular or React.js. But still, we used to say servlets and JSPs are the prerequisite, because if you want to learn Spring Web MVC, it's mandate that you should have enough knowledge on that. So while you are working on servlet, you should have done this job, configuring the servlet in the web.xml, and these are the steps. Even filter mapping, okay, filters are before the servlet. Any request it comes in without the knowledge of the user, filter trace out your request, and the request will be manipulated before it reaches to the servlet. Those are filter concept, and for that we need to do a mapping out here in the XML configurations. Those are all which you will learn in, which you should have learned in the fundamentals of Java-based web application. Any question? If you are not understanding any part of this, please do let me know. I'm here to clarify. Don't go with your own assumption. If your assumption is the right assumption, it's fine. Absolutely, I'm okay with that. But don't go with some kind of a vague assumptions and then don't complicate yourself. So in the interview, do they ask about all these? It depends on the interviewer's mindset. I cannot assure you on that, but even I used to prompt for the people who are so, seems to be so active and so passionate. I check their skill set. So I just ask them about dynamic servlet registrations and stuff like that to see if they are able to recap these lines, even though they are in the world of Spring Boot, but still are they capable enough to recall certain things of how usually people used to configure the dispatcher servlet. This is how you configure the dispatcher servlet. So how do you configure a dispatcher servlet? I'll just put this question. When I put the question, how do you configure a dispatcher servlet? People say dispatcher servlet is like configured automatically in the Spring Boot. But that's not the answer that you are supposed to give. If it's a traditional Spring application, this is how you do. If it's a Spring Boot application, you need not do, because you have an auto configuration enabled. Since the auto configuration is enabled, you see to that as and when you add the library into the pom.xml, Spring Boot will automatically activate the dispatcher servlet and give all the information that's essentially required. It creates the web application context. It registers the configuration class. It creates this dispatcher servlet, dynamically registers them, and do the URL mapping. Everything is done automated in the Spring Boot. But these steps we need to do it manually if it's a traditional Spring MVC application. This is how you need to respond to the question. It's not just a one word of responses. So try to see interview handling is a skill. Actually, it's a skill. It's an art. So you should make it a little elaborated. Not too much of elaboration, but at least technically you should elaborate things. No questions? Sure. Are we good to go?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Okay. So the next thing is, as I said, the Java configuration, right? So this is something which we have to look at enable web MVC. What this enable web MVC does, why we need to do that additionally, is because we have something called web MVC configurer option. This is exclusively for, this is used for MVC based application configuration. Okay, so this will have a set of, okay, instead of giving you this lecture, let me show you this. There's an adapter class which you will be using, web MVC configurer. Okay, if you go to this, you can see a lot of methods out here, right? This is an interface. Okay. Okay, so here, yeah, this web MVC configurer interface has certain methods. There are some methods which is helpful for performing the configuration that is required for MVC based applications. Okay, there are many methods are out there. Okay, so we might not be using all. It depends on the use case to use case which we will be using it. But technically speaking, these are all the methods that we need to use it in our Java based configuration class. So if you see, there's something called configure view resolvers. Okay, so there are certain predefined methods are already available. Okay, you can make use of those methods and start doing the these are all you can see that it's like a defaulted methods. All these are defaulted, but before it was like, since we have, it's from 1.8, right? So we have default methods and interfaces, default methods with empty implementation. Okay, but it will not force you to override. See, when I implement interface, what happens? When I say implement interface, there will be an error in the class, right? But no errors right now, because all the methods in the interface, actually before it was an adapter class, but now since 1.8 supported default, they've removed the adapter class implementation. And the class name, I would like to tell you that why I'm saying adapter is Web MVC Configurer Adapter. Okay, it is called as Web MVC Configurer Adapter. It's an adapter class, an abstract class which implements an interface, which implements the Web MVC configurer. This is what we used, but now you can see it's striked out. Why? Because it's obsoleted. This is not going to be used anymore. Instead of this, you directly use Web MVC configurer. Since in the, as you can see, it's underlined. I'm sorry, it's striked out. So Web MVC configurer now we can directly use, because they have made all the methods inside that as a default method with the empty implementation. So it will not force you to override. It's not an abstract methods. These are not abstract methods. Now you can bridge the 1.8 features. See how backward compatibilities are effectively used here. That's why we go for default methods and interfaces starting from 1.8 version onwards. You're getting it? So that's what it is. So we have to use this Web MVC configurer, but I'm not going to implement this. We need not do this anymore. Instead of doing this, you just say @enable Web MVC. That's all. It will do a default usage of all the Web MVC configuration methods. We don't need to do it anything. It will give it to the default options. Okay, adding this annotation to an @configuration class. What it does is it just uses a Web MVC configuration support. Okay, so we need not do anything. So Web MVC configuration. So what happens is it will do all the default usage of the Web MVC configuration support provided by Web MVC, but they have mentioned down one more line. See how docs is helping us. Please go through the documentation. Documentation can give you a lot of information. So what they say is, but still you don't want to leave it to the default Web MVC configuration. You want to still customize it. You want to override certain methods and you want to customize them. You can still do that by implementing the Web MVC configurer. I will show you that as well, one demo. Okay, you will be doing implements of Web MVC configurer if required. If needed, you can implement, override the method and do some additional configurations as and when required. Otherwise, you can leave it to the default @enable Web MVC. That is the reason we use this @enable Web MVC annotation. Okay, so what it does is it provides all the set of methods exclusively required for configuring the Web MVC application. And these methods are residing inside the Web MVC configurer interface. And all those methods are default methods which you will not be forced to override. Rather, if needed, you want to do some customization part, then there's a requirement for explicitly implementing the Web MVC configurer and override the relevant method that you want to customize and define it. Or else you can just leave it as such by just giving @enable Web MVC. If you go to the Spring Boot, even this is not required. Even this line is not required, because that is again internally automated by the Spring Boot application itself. So that's the reason we use this @enable Web MVC. Is that clear? This we haven't used in the traditional standalone application, but we are using it in the web application, and as a mandate @enable Web MVC annotation. Any questions on this, please let me know. So that I'll stop here. We'll take a 10 minutes of break and then we'll come back. So any questions, please do let me know. Any questions? So these terms which you should remember: Web MVC Configurer. Before it was an adapter class, abstract class, Web MVC Configurer adapter class. So you can see how the adapter class is used. What is the adapter class? Adapter class is helping us to stop the explicit overriding of all the interface, because adapter class will be an intermediate layer to implement the interface. That's how we are still syncing with all the Java, core Java features into it. So implements Web MVC Configurer is something optional, because we left it to the RT-enabled Web MVC annotation, who automates the work of all the web supports required. That's default. But if you still want to do some customizations explicitly, you go for this. That's what it means. Hope things are clear. So two things we did right now. One is web servlet configuration, the 5 to 6 steps. Okay. Then we have done the IOC configuration class. Right. So this is actually IOC configuration class, we can call it as, because IOC container is going to read through this class. According to the annotation, the IOC is going to reflect or respond or react. IOC is going to react based on this configurations that we have provided. Any questions? No questions? Okay, believe everyone are active. Okay, so I'll stop here. So we'll go for a quick
Excuse
break.
me, sir.
Yes, please. Yes.
If set load on startup, right? If we don't set to 1, then what will happen?
If you don't set to 1, then default it to 0. So it will load only at the time of very first request that comes to the servlet.
Oh.
But since it's the requirement in the Spring MVC is we need the dispatcher servlet at the initial stage itself. So that's the reason I explicitly provide that to 1.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other question? No questions? Okay. If you still have any questions, you can just have it. We'll come back and then we'll answer to them. We'll go for a short break. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the confirmation. Okay. Yeah, so if you have any questions, please do go ahead. Have you lined up with any set of questions? I'm happy to answer. Okay, fine. If there are no questions, I guess let's move forward. Before we move forward, let me pull up this diagram. So what is that we have done so far? We don't have web.xml, correct? In place of web.xml, what are we bringing in? In place of web.xml, what we brought in here?
Configuration class.
Correct. So what is the class name that we created? Web Servlet?
Web Servlet Configuration.
Configuration. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So in place of web.xml, we replaced the Java-based configuration file and we activated whom? With this Java web servlet configuration, whom we activated? The dispatcher servlet, correct? The dispatcher servlet is activated with the help of this class. So, okay, when a client comes in with the request, based on the configuration that's provided, this dispatcher servlet is activated so that your request is going to be handled by whom first? The dispatcher servlet. So when the very first, when initially the first person to handle the client's request is dispatcher servlet, and so whom we have activated right now is none other than your FC. Who's your FC? The friend control. Exactly, the friend control. Till this point, is that clear? So I'm going along with the diagram only. Okay. So friend controller is ready. Now whom we need to enable? The back controller. Right? The back controller have to be enabled. Handler mapping. I'll come to the handler mapping. We will not see this handler mapping, okay, physically, because it's an internal process that happens. It's an internal architecture that's utilized by the dispatcher servlet. We are not going to see the handler mapping right now physically, but this handler mapping process is going to happen in order to reach your back controller. Okay, in order to hit the back controllers, they will use a handler mapping and handler adapter. So handler adapter is none other than dispatcher servlet executes controllers with the help of the adapter, and the adapter can help the dispatcher servlet with the execution of these controllers only when the dispatcher comes to the right controller. How the dispatcher servlet will come to the right controller? Only with the help of the handler mapping. The handler mapping maps the incoming URL to the respective controller, identify the respective controller and intimate the dispatcher servlet. And it executes the back controller. So where we are going to write the business logic, so far we haven't written any business logic. So where we are going to write the business logic is straight into the back controllers. There is a meaning. So these back controllers are going to be demarcated with at controller or at rest controllers. Is that clear? This is for REST-based implementation. Generally, what happens in the REST controller is it is embedded with at response body. I will see all these shortly. At response body, but if you go for at controller, it will not use the at response body. We need to explicitly use the at response body combination. But REST controllers are inbuilt with response body, and this is usually for REST-based things. But in spite of REST-based, also you can use it, because at rest controllers are nothing but controller plus response body is what is at rest controllers are. Okay, so that is a way how you will create your controllers, and then you can go for normal services, DAOs, and hit your database. These are known area, right? I don't want to give much explanations. This is a place where you need to identify. After getting this lecture, after doing enough number of practice, have this diagram in place. Whenever you have an interview, just look at this diagram once. And you'll be able to answer the architecture of the MVC. Pretty clear. Okay. Fine. Now, okay, so here you can see that, right? So what this dispatcher servlet will also do parallelly, the dispatcher servlet is also doing the initializations of your web application context. The Spring container, IOC container, right? The IOC container is getting enabled along with the dispatcher servlet. We have binded that, right? You remember in the one liner of code, I binded the web application context along with the dispatcher servlet. So it can be either in the XML configuration or it can be in the Java based configuration, doesn't matter. Okay. Fine. So now let's go for creation of the back controllers. So from the com skill app, okay, from this com skill app package, I'm going to right click and create one more sub package with a name called controller and hit finish. Sorry. So com.skillup.controller is a package which is going to carry all the controllers. And I'm going to create one more sub package from the base package, which is called as service. And from that, I'm going to create one more sub package, which is called as DAO, or you can call it as repositories. Okay, anything. It's up to you. How do you want to name them? So I'm calling that as a data access object. And if needed, you can have some supplementary classes to be created. And for that, you can create a package called util. And you can create one more package for referring all your model classes. So I'm going to create, it can be called as entities, or technically now we are not going to use any entities. So I'm going to call it as model. So we have model package. So these many packages I've lined up. All these packages are child packages coming from the com.skillup. Is that clear? Now, before even we go to the controller, let me go to the model and create one Java class. And the class is going to be named as account. Okay. And this account class is going to carry some set of fields. Private int account ID, private string account name, private float account balance. Okay, so these are some of the fields that I have right now. And for all these fields, we need to create the getters and setters, no argumented constructor, and then we go for generate the getters and setters. And generate a toString. And then generate argumented constructors as well. Generate constructors with fields. Right? So we have 3 argumented constructors in it. toString method, getters and setters, and no argumented constructor. Hope this is what we have seen already in a model class in the American Express or in the inventory service. Similarly, we have this class in place. I'm not going to demarcate this with, because this is called as what bean? Exclusively, this is acted as a Java bean, non-Spring Beans, means not managed by IOC.
IOC.
Correct. That is what it means. Okay. So this is done. The model class is created. Now we can go to the controller, right click and hit a creation of a class. And here I'm going to call it as SkillUp controller. Okay. The name of the project. So I'm just having SkillUp controller. Hit finish. Now again, I'm creating one more controller. We already have the controller in place, right? We already have one controller created and activated. That is what controller? Friend controller. How many friend controller we have registered? One friend controller. So meaning is what design pattern am I following here?
Singleton design pattern.
Correct, singleton. Singleton means it's actually called as a single controller design pattern. We call it a single controller design pattern. Okay. Of course, it is like it is a type of a singleton, but more technically you call it as single controller design pattern. Single controller means existence is only one friend controller, but how many number of back controllers? N number of back controllers. Okay. Fine. Now, sorry. So this need to be demarcated as at controller. So since it is marked as at controller, will this back controller will be registered by the IOC container? Yes, it will be managed and registered by the IOC container because in the SkillUp configuration class, we have already used what annotation? At component scan annotation. So it will scan for all the components, but it will scan for component. Will it scan for controller also? Yes, because the controllers are nothing but internally component. Yes. Okay. Controllers are internal to the component only. So that's the reason even the controllers are eligible for scanning via the component scan mechanism. So you don't have at controller scan for that. You don't have at service scan. You don't have at repository scan. You have only at component scan, and variety of component annotations can be scanned for it. And this is managed by, will this be called as a Spring Bean or a Java Bean? It is a Spring Bean because it is going to be managed by IOC container. Is that clear? Hope this makes sense, right? Okay, now the controller is created. Now what controller is this? That is another important question. This is your back controller. How many back controllers we can create like this? N number. But who will invoke this back controller?
Controllers.
Who will call
Dispatcher server.
Yeah, back controller is dispatcher servlet. So DS stands for dispatcher servlet. It means it uses a helper class. Who's your helper class? Is your handler. Handler helper class is there. Request handler helper class is there. Through that it does its job. Anyways, but dispatcher servlet is the one who owns in invocation of these back controllers. Okay. So very first method that I'm going to define here is public string. There's a method called welcome, and this method is going to have a return value, and the return value is going to be hi customers, welcome to SkillUp Bank. This is the message that I want to respond to the client who's going to request for it. But now, how many back controllers are there currently?
One.
Yes, exactly, only one. So dispatcher servlet will not face any problem because as the existence is only one controller. Dispatcher servlet means dispatcher servlet uses whom to identify this controller? Your request handler, right? There's a request handler who will help us in identifying the controller. But overall, how many controller we have? Only one controller. So no problem at all. So in the URL, when I'm going to give http :/localhost 8080 / what is the application name? SkillUp Bank. Yeah, SkillUp Bank is a context root / I want to give a name called welcome. when a user gives this URL pattern name, okay, when the user gives this URL pattern name called welcome, there should be one endpoint. This is the endpoint name. Okay, this is called as endpoint name. So when a user comes with a URL carrying this endpoint name, immediately anything that comes after this slash, who's the sole responsibility to handle this URL request is your
Back controllers.
dispatcher. No, not the back controller, your front controller first. Anything that comes as a request from here is your dispatcher servlet. And the dispatcher servlet will hand over this URL to whom? To the handler mapping, request handler mapping. And this request handler mapping will rip through this URL and identify this welcome. And he will go to the one and only back controller that we have, that is nothing but skill up controller. And it will go to that particular class and identify which is marked with the name called welcome, not the method name. Okay, not the method name, but the request mapping name. You have something called request mapping name. It can be well, WEL, shortly you can call it as well. So the URL should be well at that time. When it is well, the handler mapping will look at this and identify the controller and the method information and hand it over to the DS. Dispatcher servlet will invoke this method. And the method responds what? A string. This string message is going to be engraved in an envelope. That will be an envelope. What this envelope is going to be called as? This is called as response envelope. What this response envelope will have when you open the envelope? You will have a header and you will have a body, where in the body of the envelope, this string of informations will be feeded. And this envelope through the network, who is preparing this envelope? This envelope will be prepared by the DS. Based on the response that's coming in, it will embed this information, header information, everything will be filled up in the envelope, and the envelope will travel through this network to the end user. That is your client. Who's your client? Client is a browser, right? Now the browser will receive this envelope, unwrap the envelope, and read all the header informations and make the settings of the browsers based on the header informations and capture all the body, response body. Okay, envelope, you will have a response body, the letter body, right? The body which will carry this message, and the message is going to be extracted and displayed on your browser screen. This is what is happening. So here I'm talking about what the response body. I need to fill the response body, and this is going to be automatically filled in your response body. I need to make it to be fillable inside this response body. Is this clear? Is this flow clear? Do you have any questions on this? Any questions, please do let me know. No questions? Okay, seems to be that you're clear. Now, how do we enable that endpoint name? We have to use one annotation called @request mapping. Right now I'm using request mapping. I'll be showing different other ways. Request mapping, in this you can just define multiple things: consumes, headers, header informations. What type of a method is that? Is that a get method, post method, head method, put method, delete method, or trace or patch or whatever it is? You can give a name for that endpoint. You can track the params. You can set the path. You can produce the information, or you can consume. Consume is like get, produce is like like put or post or whatever it is. Then you have value. Okay, so there are many things are there. So right now I'm just going to use this, let's say value or name, either way it's fine. So in the value I'm going to give slash welcome, any name you can give. Defaulted, this request mapping will be mapped this to a get request, defaulted to a get request. But still, if you wanted to give, you can just go ahead and use method, and in the method you can use request method dot get. We don't need to do this settings. By default, the request mapping without any method reference, it is going to be considered as get request as default. You're getting it? So what type of a request are we handling now? So this is equivalent to what now? This get request is equivalent to what in a traditional servlet?
Do get method.
Correct. Do get method, which will carry your these are the objects that will be there inside the do get method, correct? But right now you don't need to have that approach. If needed, you can carry this. Okay. Otherwise, your dispatcher servlet will have this internally. If needed, you can ask for this. Otherwise, you can leave it as such. So we don't need. So it is equivalent to the do get method, but it's more of customized. You don't need to follow the rules of do get lifecycle method of a servlet. You can just have your own method, and as many number of do get methods you wanted, you can create more flexibility out of this architecture of back controller. Rather than just relying on the front controller and customizing everything from the scratch, we can just rely on this, right? So request mapping, the name is welcome, and you have the get request, and you try to return. Now there is one challenge that we might be facing. I'll just show you. So right now we have made the dynamic changes in the dynamic class. So right click, run as, run on server. Finish. Okay, let me restart the server once. So once the server is restarted with the relevant deployment, so we are deploying to the server since we have made some changes. And again bundles your project into a .var and then pushes into your application server, which is running under the port of 8080. So you can see that this is a path to this particular server, localhost 127.0.0.1. What is your context path? Context path is your skill up bank. Can you see? Automatically the server is pulling it up. So I guess it's got started. So now localhost skill up bank slash, we have to give what now? Welcome. When I hit enter, it says not found. So you can see no mapping for get skill up. Hi customer, welcome to bank. So actually what it does is it try to resolve that return of the information. What is the return of the information from the controller? Just a static information. Hi customer, welcome. But how your dispatcher servlet is interpreting that response as a URI. So skill up bank slash hi customer. We don't have anything like hi customer welcome endpoint. This need to be displayed on the, this message should be displayed on this browser body, envelope body, that's all. So we need to inform the dispatcher servlet stating that, hey, dispatcher servlet, this is just a static information. Don't try to do some resolving work. Resolving for view. It is looking out for a view resolving. That's why we bring in that next helper class for the thing called view resolvers. Can you see this? There's something called view resolvers. Okay, we are not coming to this. We'll come to this shortly. But what I wanted to explain is it's trying to do that with the help of view resolver, and view resolver says I could not able to find any such endpoints or any specific view for it. The reason is by defaulted, anything that you return will be a return of a view resolver only. It'll look out for JSP file, it'll look out for HTML file, something else it will try to do some resolving work. So in order to avoid that, I'm just saying, hey, it's just a text. You take the text, put it into the envelope body, just send it to the client. That's all you need to do. To do that, I'm just saying a response body. This annotation I need to additionally activate. Whenever you don't have a resolving initiations, then you better apply that method to be demarcated with @response body. So @request mapping combined with @response body will let you to see this message on your browser, because this response body will intimate the dispatcher servlet to not to look out for the view resolver. Don't go for view resolvers. Please don't go for view resolver. I'm not going to display any view page. I'm not responding any view page information. I'm just directly responding a text. Can a browser render this text? Yes. Can a browser render JSON? Yes. Can a browser render XML? Yes. Those things you just responded. And that's why we say it as a response body. Don't go for view resolvers. When you have to go for the view resolvers, to resolve the view pages that need to be responded to the user, because you might be having multiple JSP pages. So which JSP page that you want to respond back, that you need to activate with the view resolvers. That we will come to the next learning. So once after you activate this, now let's try all the way and see if this response comes up. But this is a dynamic response, because dynamically you hit the dispatcher servlet prompts for the back controller, and the back controller cooks up the information and gives back to the dispatcher servlet, and the dispatcher servlet is sending it back to the client through the channel of an envelope called as a response envelope, and from there the message is displayed on the body of your browser.
Sir, instead of that, in the request mapping, we are having /welcome, right? If we give /welcome dot JSP or dot HTM, will it able to differentiate, sir, about that body content?
Here.
Yeah, right. Instead of yeah.
This is only a URI pattern name, right? It's just a URL name. When you say welcome.jsp, doesn't mean that it'll go for welcome.jsp.
Okay.
Okay, that is, this is only a naming reference. So when I'm saying welcome.jsp, you know, you will not come here at all, right? You will directly go for JSP page, like how we mentioned index.jsp.
Got it. Okay.
When you give it with an extension, it will not look out for this flow. It will directly look out for the static resource and pick the JSP page.
Okay.
That is not what we need to do anymore. That's why we bring Spring MVC. No one should touch the UI of the JSPs directly. Okay, we are going to protect the JSP page from direct access. Even if you want the JSP page to be viewed on your client browser, you need to come through the channel of this back controllers. There is a meaning. Anyways, in a shortly you will get to know the demo, right? You will understand that flow. But this change doesn't make any impact. Okay, so now this response body makes that impact. Okay, so here this is one issue I have. Okay, now you got it. Now the dispatcher servlet picks the text and just responds it as such, just as a text, no resolving. Now what is not happening is it is not going to this view resolvers. Usually by default what will happen is anything that you return is returned in terms understanding that the dispatcher servlet should quickly go to whom? View resolvers, and try to resolve for what pages? View pages. So this view resolver will help you to return with the physical location where the view page is there, and that particular view page will be picked up and responded to the client. But now I'm saying please bypass this, because I'm straight away letting you to put that information in the envelope body, and that's why these back controllers are letting it know by using at response body. When you have at response body, which helps you to say that the controller is going to help intimate the dispatcher servlet to put it in the body of the envelope. The response body means body of the envelope. The same way, see, it's a request response architecture, correct? When a response has an envelope, the same way request also has an envelope, right? That envelope is sent by whom? From the browser. The request is sent, so request envelope comes. The request envelope will reach to the dispatcher servlet, and the dispatcher servlet will unwrap the envelope and get to understand what to be done with that and gives it to the controller. So when request envelope is there, then sure there should be one at request body. Do you agree? So when you have two types of envelopes, the request envelope and the response envelope, please do make a note of it. It is nothing but the request body, at request body, and ret response body refers to the envelope. So from the envelope, request body can get you some information. From to the envelope, the response body can help you to put the information. Are you getting it? So there are two annotations which you should remember. One is response body and request body. If I'm not using response body at all, it's understanding that the dispatcher servlet, anything that the back controller returns to the dispatcher servlet, the dispatcher servlet should look out for the view resolver to resolve the problem of the view page and then give the view page informations, and that page will be bundled into the envelope and handed over to the client. That is what will happen. Okay. Yeah. So hope this gives you a bit of clarity. If any questions you have, please do let me know. First time learners, if you have any questions, please do let me know. So every method, if I'm going to do this kind of operation alone, you need to add response body every time. In order to avoid that, you can directly go back to at rest controller. When you use at rest controller, you need not use response body. Okay, you need not use response body. By defaulted, it is going to be referred to a response body, because at rest controller, it is internally having response body. It's internally having response body. This will work. It's just with having the at rest controller, it will work. Not an issue. So I'll just change some information. Okay, let's restart. You're getting it. So every time of adding the response body is not required, because at rest controller will internally have that response body in it. Okay. So that's how it's going to work around. So whenever you are looking out for this, the response operations, please make a note of it. How you want to respond. You want to respond a view operation, or you just want to respond some text informations. You decide upon that decision. You can think of having these annotations explicitly. REST controllers are explicitly used at the time of REST implementations, not suitable for a specific view-oriented applications, like dealing with JSPs, right? So in that case, better not to use at rest controllers. Okay, change is not reflected. So this is what usually people ask when you go for any technical round of interviews. What is the difference between at controller and at rest controller? Pretty simple. At controller is a base controller, annotation to demarcate a back controller as controller. At rest controller is also demarcating the back controller as a controller. The additional advantage of using rest controller is to handle with response bodies. So a convenience, it's just a convenience annotation that is itself annotated with at controller and at response body. Okay. Why the reflection doesn't happen? Okay, let me try to republish again. Actually, I've changed this bank to caps B in caps. That is not reflecting here. Yeah, now it is. Right? So the thing is, the REST controller is still working, but you don't need to additionally have a response body because it's a convenient annotation. Rather than combining with that controller and response body, you can just have the at REST controller alone in place. If you have any questions, please do let me know. So now what if in case I have one more controller, or you have one controller, two controllers, or three controller, back controllers. Henceforth, when I'm saying controller, please recall it, or please interpret them as a back controller statements. Okay, so I'm going to create one more class called product controller. Okay, inside this you're going to have a different method, and this is also going to be marked as at rest controller, and internally to it public void home. I'm sorry, just say string public string home return welcome to product page of SkillUp Bank. Okay, now this is also going to be demarcated with at request mapping slash product. Okay, some name I'm giving, and if needed you can go for method or just leave it without. That's okay. Default is get. But instead of product, I'm not going to give product. Instead, I'm going to give welcome. So now you have two controllers which has a mapping of URL to welcome. That is your SkillUp controller is also having the welcome, and product controller is also having welcome. So now let's go ahead and see what's going to happen. Okay. So let me redeploy it. Sometimes the application will not be flushed properly inside the server, so that's why I'm doing it every time as a redeployment, as a proper redeployment. So the URL is going to be the same. Welcome, and there also it is welcome. Okay. Now when I go ahead and hit welcome, what is happening? Yeah. So now it seems to be, I guess, what is published again? Yes, still the problem is there. Okay. Let's see if this makes it. I am actually expecting a conflict error. Not sure why that's not coming. Is the product controller been created properly? At rest controller at request mapping value equals welcome. Skill up controller is also value equals welcome. Okay, let me see if I could resolve this. Ping slash skill up. Okay, so now it's picking up the skill up. When I give the name of this controller to be a skill up, the same way I'm trying to do it for product. Let's see if we are able to access this product at request mapping. This is class level request mapping, which we are enforcing. So this will help us in differentiating the two controllers. This is what is the problem. Why this is not recognized? Product controller at rest controller at request mapping value is welcome. Yeah, now it is coming. So if you see here, there is a product controller and there is a skill up controller. If it's a skill up, you just see hi customer, welcome to skill up bank. If it's a product, you will get the additional information saying that welcome to product page of skill up bank. So we have two URLs. Before what I was actually, it has to end up with an error because it maps to the same name. Okay, the welcome. So it should be a conflict error. I'm not sure why the error is not thrown, but you can try it out at your end. It has to end up with an error. The reason that there are two back controllers, back controller 1 and back controller 2, and two back controllers are having the same endpoint name for one of its method, but the method name is different. Here it is home and there it is something welcome, right? So method names are different, but still the endpoint name is same. So to resolve that problem, okay, to resolve that, to which one of the welcome does this dispatcher servlet should call for, that can be resolved only with the help of the URL. In the URL, if you place dot product, the handler, right, this person, okay, the handler mapping, this person will look out from that URL. If the URL has some product information, then quickly this request handler, the handler mapping, will go to that particular controller and get the reference and give it to the dispatcher servlet. So the dispatcher servlet will use that specific controller reference to call the method. Because the welcome is same, how this handler mapping can resolve it? They can resolve only by giving some additional flag name, and that is called as a controller name, back controller name. To give a back controller name, so it is always a good practice to have a back controller names. Okay, even if you have a one back controller, you better have it with the name. Okay, now you might have 6 back controllers. How do you differentiate? In all the back controllers, you can have the same endpoint name. It can be, it might be. Based on the use case, you might have it, but how you will differentiate? Each controller should be given with the name, and how to give a name for the controller again, you will use the same annotation called request mapping. With the help of request mapping, each and every back controllers will be uniquely identified with the name of the mapping. So this is controller level name that we define, controller level endpoint that we have given, and this is method level endpoint. So first you have to hit whom? The controller level endpoint, and then you have to give the method level endpoint name, that is your welcome. If you want to go to the skill up controller, then you have to give slash skill up, right, and then slash welcome. So that handler mapping will help you to map out this and then help the dispatcher servlet to reach to the right controller. Any questions you have, please do let me know. This is what should happen actually. This is the actual expected output. If I give it without product, might be because of cache that would have responded, but this is what not found. Okay, because you have a specific name there. You have to give it with product slash, and then you have to give with skill up. So if you create some 10 back controllers, please ensure each controller has a specific name, unique name for it. Okay, it has to hold a unique name. Any question?
Here we mentioned product and welcome, the two request mapping.
Yes.
But actually in URL slash product slash welcome you are using. But if only welcome only if you use means that also will work. Product name we mentioned, that request mapping controller level we mentioned as a product.
before
Correct.
that we are not mentioned that request mapping as product controller level we not given. That time welcome only we in URL we gave. That time correctly worked. Now that controller level name we gave. Controller
Yes.
level now if I am after mentioning the controller level mem only welcome only I will put in URL that also will work, or otherwise it is mandatory to mention controller level name and method number level name both in the URL.
Correct. So that's what you're seeing right now. You're seeing my screen right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when this is what you're saying, right? We're only with welcome. Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Only with welcome. If you give absolutely, you are not supposed to get a response.
Okay.
Because a handler mapper is confused. If you just say a welcome, it should not render anything. It should only say not found. That the URL itself is not found because the controllers are stopped from entering into it without providing the controller name in the URL.
Okay.
So in the URL mandate, you have to give skillup/welcome, or you have to give product/welcome. You're getting it?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. If two controller are there, only one controller skill up / welcome only if we are having means that time also it is mandatory to mention in URL controller name.
If you overall you have only one back controller, in that case you don't need to have a name. You don't need to give a name, controller name. If you don't give a controller name, you can directly access the endpoint. But as per the standard, it's good to have a name for a controller. Okay. If you don't give a name for the back controller, see, don't get confused. The problem comes only when there are two endpoints with the same name. I'm explaining this. When there are two endpoints with the same name, there is a conflict. To resolve the conflict, we are going for naming the controllers. Now, let's assume in the back controller 1, you have a X name. Okay. And in back controller 2, you have Y name. Do I need to give a controller name still? The endpoint name for a method is X, and here the endpoint name is Y. Do I need to give a name for the controller or not?
No need.
No need. Why? Because the endpoint names of the methods are
Different.
Different. Very good. Excellent. But I will give a name here. Let's say BC1/BC2. Is there any harm in giving this?
No.
No. Will it work still?
Uh,
No. Will it work or not? BC1/X will work.
Yeah.
BC2 and Y will work.
Work, but but only X only if I give means in URL.
It won't work. Correct. If you just give X, it won't work because you have to come through the controller name first to reach your X.
Okay.
So
If
when you
no-
give a controller name, it's mandate to come via the controller name, and then only you can reach the method level endpoint. Okay.
If we are not mentioned BC1, that time only X only will allow. If BC1 if we give means only BC1 and the X that only will allow.
Excellent. Yes, that's how it is. Correct.
Okay.
You're correct. Okay. And here in BC2, we are supposed to say BC2/Y.
Okay.
But if in case I have something called Z here, and here also Z, will there be any problem now after giving this BC1 and BC2 to identify this Z? Not a problem.
Through control we can differentiate it.
Yeah, in the URL you are differentiating BC1/Z, and here you are going to say BC2/Z. So it is unique now. Okay.
Okay.
This combination makes unique, right? But if I just give this combination in the URL, will it be unique? No. There where the problem is. That's why we go for the controller names. It's not that's why we go for controller names. It's always good to have a back controller name. Okay.
Then root request mapping is compulsory, sir. Without that mapping, we can't come inside this class.
Which one?
Without this root request mapping, we can't come inside this.
Correct. You can't come to the welcome without product.
Okay.
But if I remove this, you can come directly to welcome. But keeping in mind that there is no conflict of names. Another controller should not have this name called welcome.
Then skillup/welcome will automatically.
Skillup/welcome will take. Correct. Okay. If you have skillup there, yes, skillup/welcome will take. And here you can directly come to welcome. This will take only product welcome. I'm sorry, a welcome without any controller name. So what actually it does is it depends on the URL that comes in. Okay, what the URL you give, let's say SkillUp Bank /welcome one URL. Okay, another URL that you're giving is SkillUp Bank. SkillUp Bank is your root context. Okay, you always have that in mind. /SkillUp/welcome. Now tell me, this will take you where? This URL will take you where as per this combination?
Directly to this welcome.
This SkillUp/welcome will take you to this product controller, correct? Because there's no controller name, right? I've commented this. I assume that I've commented. So it'll come here. This one will go to where?
SkillUp controller.
Correct. It will go to the SkillUp controller. You're getting it? So this is the name of the controller that I'm giving. Here there is no name of the SkillUp controller at all. So it will directly go to the controller, which has, there is no name for the controller, and the controller has a method endpoint name as welcome. That particular method will get executed. That's all. So that's why in order to avoid all those troublesome confusions, it's better you always give a name. Simple. Is that getting clear? Give a name for the controller and access the endpoint. That would ease up your life and avoid your confusion as well. Give a controller name and access the endpoint. Doesn't matter whether the endpoint is same or not of the method level. You don't need to worry upon it. The reason is the controller name will safeguard you by uniquely identifying them. Simple. Any other question? Do anyone have any other question?
The request mapping value will be class to class unique or different, sir. No problem.
Come again?
The request mapping value you are giving now /welcome.
Yes.
Suppose some other classes is having the same root value as welcome, means it will accept or not. It won't accept.
You're talking about this one, method level endpoint or class level endpoint?
Method level, not class.
Method level you have welcome. Okay. In the other class also we have the method level as welcome. Correct. That's what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, that is the scenario when you don't have a root. Yes, of course, it should end up with a conflict.
Okay.
This is what is the nature of flow is. That's how the understanding is, but didn't happen in my case because of, I'm not sure if that is because of a cache or is there any other change have been done. But ideally, if two controllers are in existence and if they are ending up with the same endpoint name in both the controllers, then there's a confusion arises. Okay. So in order to avoid that confusion is where we go for the class level annotations as well. That's the overall understanding.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other question? Okay. So now, since we have this flow, you saw that there are a couple of controllers are in place, and we have this welcome, just referring it as a method level endpoint. Now we have to move forward and returning to some JSP pages. So we have to create some JSP pages and see if that JSP page is getting invoked or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look out to this web-inf directory. You can see that source, main, web app, web-inf. Inside the web-inf, you can create one more subdirectory folder called views. Any name you can give. The reason I'm dropping it inside the web-inf, okay, is because to protect it from not accessing these files directly by the user. User should not access these files directly. So I'm protecting it by placing it inside the web-inf/views directory. And inside this, I'm going to drop in one JSP page. You can right click and create a search for the JSP. You will have the JSP file. Just hit next and give a name for it. Let's say it's going to be skillup home.jsp. Okay, hit finish. So now you will get this JSP page created. Default templates will be there, and here I'm going to call it as skillup bank homepage. Okay, so you can just have some style, give right something. Okay, so I'm just creating this home page. Now I want to come to this home page. When you hit the skillup controller welcome, you need to come to the home page. You should not see this information like hi customers, welcome to skillup bank. Instead, it should come to the JSP page, skillup bank homepage, it should display. So how do we do that? Going to the skillup bank, skillup controller, okay, instead of having this, you will return that JSP page /web app /web-inf /views. Okay, I guess we don't need to give web app. Let's see this. Okay, so web-inf is the location folder, and inside the views I have this file called skillup home.jsp. Now what will happen? Now I'm not going to use this REST controller. Okay, I'm coming back to the controller because I don't want the response body anymore. Okay, I'm not going to use response body since it's a view page handling. I'm just saying when the method is called, this method should return the JSP's file, your view page information, and the dispatcher servlet should look out for this view page and display it for us. So that is the logic behind this. So let's see what's going to happen here. This is only for skillup/welcome. Okay, we are returning a JSP page, returning the JSP page. That is the meaning. JSP page information, we can say, based on some logic, we are returning this. You can choose the JSP page based on some business logic, this page or that page, that depends on some logic which you can write here. It's a straight return value I'm doing, but down the lane you can write a lot of business logics here and then choose the JSP page as in a return. Okay, so now okay, it's web-inf, right? It should be web-inf. So let's publish this again. Now skillup banks. Okay, I've given welcome here, right? Skillup. The controller level naming have to be given. So that's why there was not found. It's trying to load. Perfect. We got it. So now what happens is it's when you hit the welcome endpoint, it returns the JSP page. The home page is returned right now, but I'm not calling that JSP page here, right? So what happens if I just call the JSP page here? You will not able to get access to the JSP page. You have to come directly to the controller, and the controller will return the JSP page information, and the dispatcher servlet will pick up. This is index page. Okay, forget about it. Index page is accessible directly, but skill up home is protected inside the web-inf. You cannot access the web-inf views directly from the URL. URL can't reach to that particular path. It can't. It's protected highly. You are not able to access a resource that's available inside the web-inf. So it's always good to have all your view pages to be kept inside the web-inf directory. It can be in the views, or you can directly place it inside the web-inf also. That's up to you. But right now what I'm doing is I'm just returning the JSP page information. That's all. You reach the controller and the controller returns the JSP page. Why I need to reach to the controller to get the JSP page? Can't we directly access the JSP page? Of course, as I said, you need to return the JSP page based on some business logic. Then you are supposed to come inside the controller and go back to the view page. So now what happened is right now why it took some time initially is like the JSPs have to be converted to servlet, and then it should create as an instance, and then it should get loaded into the container. The very first time when you give a request, that's the architecture of the JSP. So now when I give the request, it loads the page. And behind the scene, what happens is this. Okay. This happens. Dispatcher servlet uses the handler mapping to identify the controller. Adapter is helping to reach that particular controller. In the controller, there is a method with the endpoint called welcome, and that method is called. When the method is called, the logics are executed, and finally it returns. What it returns is the path. This time when I'm returning that string, I didn't mark that at response body. Did you keenly monitor that? I removed that because I don't want to just bind that as a string in your envelope. Okay, as a message. No, it's not like that. Instead, that return should come back to the dispatcher servlet. The dispatcher servlet will hand over that return to the view resolver. The view resolver, what it does. So what is the return that we are getting?
JSP.
No. Yeah, that is of course, yes, JSP. But from the method, what is it we are getting? From the method, we are not getting JSP. From the method, what we are getting is the address, the JSP page name, and the extension. Okay, this is what we get from the back controller, and the back controller give it to whom? This information to the dispatcher servlet, and the dispatcher servlet will hand over this information to the view resolver. He will go to the specific location and pick the JSP and get all the static codes and give it back to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher will prepare the response, and everything will be prepared from the view content and then give it as a response back to the user. This is what is happening right away. You're getting it? So view resolver comes into the picture when it is handling with the view pages. But the one thing that you closely monitor here is there's a little bit of complexity in every places. If I have some 100 JSP pages created in my bigger application, in every method operations, you need to specify the address and the JSP page name and the extension. You're going to use only JSP, not any other view pages. So this can be further customized. The view resolver can be further customized. How it can be customized? You need not give the address. You need not give the extension. Just give the JSP page name alone. You are supposed to give only the JSP page name. Rest will be automatically binded by the dispatcher servlet if you customize this view resolver. I'm going to show you how we are going to customize it. Probably it will take another 5 to 10 minutes. Please bear with that. So this view resolver can be customized according to our need, and the view resolver will be binded default with this prefix and suffix. suffix will be always extension, and prefix will be the address. In between, what you have is just the JSP page name. That alone you will give it here. You need not keep writing all these anymore in your program code. Okay, it can be automated just by giving the right configuration. And that's what which I'm going to show right now. So if you see this, I'm not going to give this return. Okay, instead the return which I'm going to give right now is return. What is the JSP page name? Skill up
home.
Home. That's all. Let's see what's going to happen. I'm not going to give the complete path. Okay. So it's republishing. Full republish. The changes I'm making is not instantly reflected. See? Oh no, let's wait. Let it completely load. Not found. What is not found? How that is taken? Skill up bank, skill up slash skill up home. Because you are returning only skill up home. So it is going and looking out for skill up home. There's nothing like skill up home. Are you mentioning JSP or are you mentioning HTML? What you are mentioning here? No clue at all. No address, no extension. So automatically this view resolver can't do anything. The view resolver is completely confused that what am I supposed to do right now? You're just giving skill up home. Where will I go and search for what file, what extension? No information. Before I gave the exact location where the JSP file is located so that the view resolver was default able to look out for that file and get you the response. But now that's not the case. So if you go back to your skill up configuration, right? I told you that I'll be coming back to this, right? So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to use a bean. I'm going to create a bean. Okay, a bean definition for the IOC container to manage. Public internal resource view resolver. Okay, there is an internal resource view resolver class. Okay, it's a URL based view resolvers. So in this class will help us in offering the option to set your prefixing and suffixing values. So you can call it as internal resolver. Any name would suffice. And to be more meaningful, we'll just keep it as internal resource view resolver. Okay, now in this, I'm going to create an instance. You know what the bean definitions are, right? So it's for defining the instance. Then the two things that you have to set. So setter based injection we are going to use right now. Setter based injection we are going to use now. IRVR dot set prefix, and in the prefix you are supposed to give the prefixing address, that slash web hyphen inf slash views slash and IRVR dot set suffix, and in the suffix, what is the suffixes? Dot JSP, and return the IRVR. By this pattern, this is going to configure. Okay, by this pattern, this is going to configure the IRVR. The IOC container will instantiate the resolver, internal resource view resolver, set all the configurations and make the instance ready. Now you go back to the image. Can you see this image right now? I'm just scrolling. Is the image visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So in the image, if you see the view resolver, right? This view resolver is completely customized. Now what is done in the view resolver? The view resolver we have given, whenever a return comes, it should go to that specific location and append the suffix with an extension called .jsp and look out for the physical location and prepare the view and hand it over to the dispatcher. You're getting it? So that is what is the communication. The view resolver is not left default. Instead, the view resolver is made customized by doing this configuration, a bit of configuration. Okay. So in Spring Boot, we need not do this. We don't need to do this in Spring Boot because Spring Boot we will be using properties file and there we can configure. If you're going to use JSP files in Spring Boot, and you can do that. You don't need to do explicit configuration like this. But internal resource view resolver is a type which helps us to create a customized view resolver. Customizing the view resolver. It's not customized. Customizing the view resolver with the help of this internal resource view resolver and set the path and the JSP. Just now we got this output, right? I mean, it's like not found. So it was like not found. So I want to republish. Let's see if post republishing it works fine. So it's a one-time attempt, prefix and suffix, one-time settings. Henceforth, in your controllers, you need not give the complete prefix and the extension. Just provide the JSP name. That's more sufficient. Now we go. How come is that suddenly it is recognizing what is given in the skill-up controller? Just I'm returning the name of the JSP page, not even .jsp, but still it can resolve it because with the help of the customized view resolver in place, it is able to do that. You're getting it? Is that clear? So that's what this view resolver meant for. Tomorrow we'll take this course to a different level, more of add-ons. We will create forms, we'll bind the forms, models, everything we'll do it. But this is something fundamental, which you have to keep in mind. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. So when you just return this piece of skill-up home from this method, it comes to the dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet straight away hands over that skill-up home name, and the view resolver, which is already customized, will do the prefixing and suffixing work and look out for that respective view page and respond it to the dispatcher servlet. That's what it is. So all the business logic will all be residing in where? In this back controllers. Okay. Don't use response body at this time. What will happen if I do response body? Any idea? What will happen if I just add response body? Just recall the envelope which I explained in detail. If I add the response body,
just return the string statement.
The skill-up home string will be displayed on the browser. Just the text will be displayed on the browser. It won't go to the JSP page and all. Because instructing that, hey, dispatcher, don't do a view resolving work. Just take the string and append it onto the browser. That's all. Okay. So now that's not the operation that we are doing. It's slightly different. We are returning it to the view resolver to pick up the right JSP page and then return. So there is no need for response body anymore. But request mapping is something very important. To shorten this request mapping, we have something called get mapping. Okay. So this line and this line are same. This is introduced from 4.0 version of Spring version. So using this request mapping, giving a value, method, request, get is all shortened to just calling it as what mapping? Get mapping, and give the endpoint name. That's all. Either you give this or this, it's up to you. But I will be using forward like this: at get mapping, at post mapping, at put mapping, at delete mapping. So I'll be using shortened version of annotations. But internally, if you look at this one, okay, if you are just looking at this get mapping, what is having inside the get mapping? At request mapping method equals get. Instead of doing this lengthy line, you just shortened it with get mapping. Are you getting it? That's how it differs with get mapping, put mapping, post mapping. If you go for post, if you want to do a post operation, you will do what? Request mapping, the value equals something, the endpoint name, and then method equals request method dot post. But now we don't need to do that because you have a direct name called at post mapping annotation. You can quickly use that. That's the need of this get mapping and post mappings. Is that clear? Any questions on this? Please let me know. I'll take another 2-3 more minutes. Okay, just 3 more minutes. So right click, new, you have something called Spring Starter Project. Just click on the Spring Starter Project. And here I'm going to give Access Bank. Okay, hit next, or just give some naming here, com.access. Package name is com.access. Hit next. Here it will it will prompt you to choose the libraries that you want to add in the. It's a Spring Boot application what I'm creating right now. Okay, so I want to include the Spring Web dependencies. Spring Web, you remember we did it manually. Here you can choose it at the time of creating the project itself. I'm giving the project name. It's again a Maven based project. I'm using the packages and everything. It's a jar archive. Embedded Tomcat server is there in this project. Hit next and finish. This will create a Spring Boot project. Just hold on for a few seconds. So you can see a access bank appears. And the Maven is doing all its Mavenizing work. And it will highlight with a flag called Spring Boot shortly. I'm just creating the project. That's all. I'm doing nothing else. It's trying to download the relevant dependencies I guess. You can see that visually on the progress. It's progressing. You will see the difference. SkillUp Bank. This is our web project. Customized manual creation work. Everything is from the scratch. But if you see the Access Bank, there is a flag appears, a label, boot, refers that it is a Spring Boot application. This is also a web application. This is also going to be a web application. The only difference is this is a standard Spring Web MVC application. This is a web application using boot embedded with Tomcat. I'm not going to deploy it in the WebLogic. Okay. Instead, it's going to be self-executable. That's what is the essence of microservices. Microservices are self-executable components, right? So if you go straight, it will have all its default switch. The switch is nothing but at Spring Boot application. This one switch does everything. This one switch does everything. If you hover it, you will see that. At enable auto configuration, at Spring Boot configuration, at component scan. So everything is in place. So you don't need to do anything out there. Okay. So it's just a one switch. You have a main, the Spring application. This will trigger the context. Everything will be done. What you have to do is you just go to the dependency and see if the Spring Web is there. Yes, but here it is all called as Spring Boot Starter Web. But that Spring Boot Starter Web is internally having Spring Web in it. You can see how many things it automatically referring it. Whatever is essentially required for Spring Web application, everything is maximum as default loaded. You can also see a Tomcat comes into the picture. That's the embedded Tomcat that we have. Now you can see the Spring Web MVC, which we included. Everything is in place. OK, now this is what I did. You go straight, access, right click, new, go to the package, bind them with dot controller, hit it, right click there, create a class called access controller, hit OK, and demarcate this class as at REST controller or controller, whatever. Now you're getting to know what I mean by those things. So at REST controller, public string welcome return welcome to access bank and demarcate them with at get mapping. Now I'm not going to use request mapping / welcome. If in case you want to denote a controller level mapping name, then you can give at request mapping there and give a name for the controller as access. This will not have a context path. Right click this access bank, run as Spring Boot app, or you can just run it as a Java application. Either way it will work. When I just say Spring Boot app, there will be a problem in starting the Spring Boot app. Can anyone tell me what will be the problem?
Same port, sir, 8080 plus the Jboss
Yes.
is running, right?
That should be the problem, but let's see what it is reflecting. I guess it started still. Let's see. This is also 8080, right? Its port is started and it is running. How it is picking up? Sometimes it will be weird. Okay, not an issue. Let's see. So going back, localhost / 8080 / access / welcome. So it says welcome to Access Bank. Okay. This could be a different reason why it is still accepting the same port, but usually it should not. That's okay. No context path, but still you got the welcome to Access Bank, which we have written in the controller. How much second it took to create this project?
Less than a minute. Less than a minute.
Hardly a minute. Not even a minute.
Less
But for
than
the last 3 hours, you just realized for the last 3 hours, we are struggling to understand the fundamental through this skill up bank. Now, which one would you prefer?
Spring Boot.
Of course, Spring. So that's how. So we, as a developer, we look forward in productivity, right? We need to be more productive. Highly, this is productive. The 3 hours of session I've just summarized in just less than a minute. All the newbies, the freshers will only opt for this. They will not go back to this traditional Spring application anymore. And going forward, you will see all the freshers will not start their learning of the framework from Spring scratch like core or things like that. They will straight away sit on top of the Spring Boot, and that's already been taken place in most of the projects. Even in my own project, in my own team, I have freshers, and I could see those peoples are straight away put into those Spring Boot. So that's it. Why the hell I have to go down and do all these kind of a messed up work? I don't want to do. But the main problem is your learning curve is drastically reduced. You cannot withstand for a complex applications when there is a lot of problems or challenges that you're facing. You'll be completely blocked. Unless and until if you're not figuring out and fine tuning the scratch work, it's very difficult. Nothing else. I just created a project, straight away went to the controller, knocked up the annotations, and made the internal embedded server to pop up, and my job is done. Still, you can make the Spring Boot to deploy in the Jboss EAP. I can still make it to deploy in this EAP. That needs another two more configurations. I cannot make this to run in this Jboss EAP right now because it's a standalone application. If you right click, go to the properties, just investigate a little more, you'll get to know that. You have a project facet. What was the project facet that we had default when we created our own web project? What was the project facet?
Dynamic web.
Yeah, now see it is not checked, but it is still a standalone application looking out for what server? Embedded Tomcat server. So who controls the Tomcat server now? The project is controlling the Tomcat server, but my skill up bank is controlled by whom? By the Jboss. It has a full control.
Okay.
But if you have a microservices, you want to deploy a microservices as like that in Dockerize, You'll go for the internal embedded server, just quickly create a Spring Boot and do all your business logic. That's all, your job is done. You don't need to spend much of a time on all your configurations part. We have spent maximum time on the configuration. Do you realize that? We have spent maximum time on the configuration. All those configuration are zeroed, zero configuration right now, and you're ready to start your application as quickly as possible. That's what your Spring Boot is all about. I'm done with it for today. I think I've taken 15 plus more minutes. If you have any questions, you can. People who have questions can stay. Probably I'll take another 10 more minutes of your questions. People who don't have any questions, you're free to wind up. Or people who want to listen to the others' question, you can stay and have your stay here. Any questions do anyone have? Please let me know. Anyways, I'm not going to take you through the Spring Boot, but I just wanted to give you a sort of demonstration to understand the power of Spring Boot. But as we are going to go with another one more week next week also, it's completely from the scratch. Even the security we are going to see from the scratch. Now, I'm not going to take you through the Spring Boot because Spring Boot is a separate course. It's not that I just want to make some money out of it, keeping it as a separate course. Don't take it in that sense. But my mindset is obviously I want to give the base, the fundamentals. That's all. But Spring Boot also has a bigger learning. OK, there you will be integrating with JPA repositories and security, speed up process. A lot of things are there. That's a separate study. OK, it's a separate course. But it won't go for long, like 24 hours or something like that. Probably we can just summarize with some 9 hours of course. So nothing much big. People who have learned the Spring, then it's going to be pretty easy for you to learn there. Any questions?
What is microservices, sir? Microservices.
That's a different big domain. I cannot just like that give it as a one shot. But shortly, I will say it's a small service. OK, it's a small runnable service which uses protocols like REST for communication. So this is one microservice. Access Bank is one microservice. So let's not Access Bank as itself. Let's say Amazon. OK, Amazon is a product. In Amazon, you have a product. You have customer. You have finance. You have feedback. You have cart. You have orders. You have inventory. So Amazon has multiple things in their application, right? All these will be a part of a single VAR. That's called as monolith application. Monolith. Now what we created as a skill up is what? The skill up is what actually? It's a monolith application. Single VAR which has everything. All these will be stuffed in the VAR. But all these will be isolated. Product a separate jar. Customer separate jar. Finance separate jar. Everything is independent.
So anything happens means it won't reflect other service.
Exactly. So when the feedback goes, exactly. When the feedback is down, do I want to make the whole Amazon site to go down? That's how it is when we were working on monolith, correct? But now feedback is only a one part, right? Doesn't mean that feedback should impact your order placement or inventory, right? But the whole system goes down. Since it's an independent microservices, all these are microservices. It's a pizza team, they will say. Each microservices will be a small pizza team, okay, which they will be forming. Probably I'll just come up with some webinar on that, okay, shortly on microservices introduction. Probably it'll take 1.5 hours of time. You can learn that as well. So feedback is down means the others are not. Product, you can write it in Python. Customer, you can write it in Java. Finance, you can write it in C. Cart, you can write it in Scala. What is the advantage of microservices? Language agnostic. And their communication is all through JSON, XML, or BSON. We will not go for this kind of a view pages or something like that. It's all going to be a front end, which is Angular, and you will be having a gateway. It will go through the gateway, and then gateway will hit those multiple microservices. And that's what microservices are. Microservices are small services which has everything in it. Small services which has everything in it. And the database will be different. Product will connect to the Oracle DB. Customer will connect to the MySQL database. Finance might connect to the NoSQL DB of MongoDB. Cart or orders might be placed into some some of the Redis. Okay, so database can be separate because it's all isolated, separate, right? Everything is small microservices. Before everything was dumped into a single war. That's what your microservices. I've just given a basic intro. Hope that makes sense. Any other question?
Some REST API, SOAP API is something I heard. Actually, what is that? I couldn't understand. What is REST API? What is SOAP API? Where we are using that like that?
Yeah, but I don't think if I can respond this now, but probably I'll take this. It'll take some time to give more understanding on that, but I'll give you some reference. Overall understanding is REST APIs are representational state transfer, which is accessed through the endpoints. It's just multiple endpoints you create in the REST. SOAP is something which you need to customize it. You have different versions of customizations in the SOAP. It has a specific language called WSDL, Web Service Definition Language you have to create. SOAP is a protocol. REST protocol, SOAP protocol. REST protocol uses HTTP. Okay, internally. REST uses HTTP protocol itself. SOAP can use, SOAP itself is a protocol. Okay, SOAP itself is one protocol for enabling the web service. Web service is a different category. REST service is a different category. REST services is one part of like a web service, but web service is all customization. So you will have JAX-R, JAX-B, JAX-R, multiple standards of web services libraries are there. That's a different story. But web services uses a SOAP protocol, a WSDL operation, but REST will directly go with HTTP, and it's more convenient and it's more reliable and it's more open in exchanging of the communications like JSON or XML. If you look at the web service SOAP implementation, you're going only through the channel of XML as your communication. That's a different broader view of study, but this is the overall overview. Okay, any other question? Any other question very relevant to this? So
Sir,
yeah, I don't
this
think you need
JSP
to
page.
study much on SOAP or web services. It's all outdated. We are not going to use any much of a web services. You can concentrate more on REST. Yes, please. Someone was asking some questions. Sorry.
Sir, in this JSP page, suppose I am doing any other on-click event or anything, means that also handled by this handler mapping, yeah? Here.
It's not like, on click. You will have some button. That's what we will see tomorrow. I'll just create some form and the form will be filled up, and you'll have a button there, submit button. And when I click submit button, that submit button also should be handled by the handler. First, the request comes to the dispatcher servlet, and where to submit to the back controller to specific endpoint. Dispatcher servlet will hand it over to that endpoint, and the endpoint will communicate to the database. Whatever you feed it in will be stored in the database. That's the overall view. Yeah, any other question? Any questions? Please don't hesitate.
For Spring Boot application you created, right, sir? You didn't mention any Java version at all? You default to Java 14?
No. At the time of creation of that itself, I pointed out, right? Spring Startup project, Java 11. So you can choose whichever version that you wanted. These are the supported one for the current Spring Boot. So I have 14, so you can either go with 8 or 11, but I can't go with 16. So I left it to default 11. So if you expand this Axis Bank, you should notice that the SE reflection is 11. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. That's what those steps are also missing actually. Mavenizing is perfect. Everything is intact, readily available. I still can take another 5 more minutes in case you have more questions. Not an issue.
Sir,
Yes, please.
I'd like to check my understanding whether I understood correct or not. So on coming to the JSP file return, so when we are returning a string without response body, so it will check. Check to the configuration, right? Whether there is prefix or suffix written inside the configuration. If there are JSP files in that particular path, it will pick those JSP file. Am I right? Or else it will so can you go to, yeah, that's what the prefix webinf/view. So I have to place all my JSP files inside that folder. Am I right? So whatever JSP files within that view folder, it will pick those. It will search for those. Okay.
Correct. So it's very simple. The back controller returns the name called what was the name that I've kept?
Skill up home.
Skill up home. So this is the only thing that it returns. Okay. But this is a string. According to us, it's a string. But when the back controller returns this to the DS, he will not just take it as a skill up as a string alone, because we have removed that at response body. You noted that, right? We removed that. So it just takes that name. He will use the helper class. Who is the helper class? There is view resolver. Okay, this is a default view resolver. If this is just a skill up, it can't identify any address or extension. Nothing is there, so it got confused. So this view resolver, it will look out for the configuration that's been written here.
Okay.
Can you see the name here?
View resolver, yeah.
So this view resolver will look out for this type of instance and get the configuration details, instructing the view resolver saying, hey, you put an prefix, and instructing the view resolver, hey, you put an suffix. So what the view resolver will do is taking the skill app, which is given by whom? By the DS. It'll append this prefix plus the skill up, and then it'll append this suffix plus. Will you get a complete location and the extension and the file of the JSP? Yes, view resolver will get it. It will identify that location and hand it over to the DS, and DS will look out for that file and get all the static contents and then respond it to the user. That is what happens. So absolutely, yes, your understanding is correct. To reiterate, yes, this is how it works. So what happens if this is not given? If this configuration is not given, what happens? The view resolver is confused.
404 error.
Every time we have to give
you can avoid that error without giving this. You can avoid that error. How to avoid it? In the controller itself, you have to give the prefix explicitly and suffix. Yes, correct. We need to give the complete information there itself. Then your view resolver will not get confused. It will look out the location and hand it over to the DS. But every time, in order to duplicate that work, because you might be using for multiple JSP pages, right? So in every endpoint methods, you need not do that. That's why one-time attempt of configuration, which you can do to avoid that. But what happens if you are having an HTML page? You want to respond to a HTML page. Can you do that? No, you can't. You cannot configure twice as a resolvers here. It can be either one, JSP or HTML. If you have HTML, then you have to give a complete path only. This is applicable only for JSP pages.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to ask.
Correct. If it is a HTML, you change it to HTML here. If everything is HTML, you better change it to HTML. But you have mix-up of JSP and HTML. No, you don't have the provision to tackle with that of resolvers.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Any other question? Another 2 more minutes I can take. Feeling a little hungry. No questions? Okay. In that case, then we can wind up. Tomorrow we are going to go a long way. Be prepared. So we'll see a lot of things tomorrow. So I'll catch you up in the group. So thank you all, and have a great night and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, sir.